All right, I'm going to start with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father in heaven, honored be thy name. May thy kingdom come. May thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us each day our daily bread, and forgive us of our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us on a righteous path, and guard us from the evil. In your name we pray. Amen. All right, all right. Shalom, shalom, family. We're going to get right to what I'm going to do today. So I'm going to be reviewing this little video. So as always, as we do these things, fair use. So we're going to be doing this for educational purposes, as I think it's important to review what people say. Let's go.
Dr. Rob, I'm coming at you today from Washington, D.C. I had an opportunity after a tour of a couple of churches in this area to take the day. I've been exploring, wandering on it. I've never actually been here before, and this is a joy and a delight. I'm sitting in front of the reflecting pool, the World War II memorials over here. I just walked past 900,000 little white flags, one flag for each person who's died of COVID-19. I've been people watching all day. I love people watching. I've seen people from all different nationalities, races, colors, creeds, you name it, they're here. And it is just a fascinating thing to consider humanity, who we are, what we are, where we came from. But I want to continue my series that I've been doing on the Jewish nation. I tried to get into the Holocaust Museum, not realizing I would need a ticket about a month out, so I wasn't able to go there. One of my recent episodes was on the inbreeding within the early Israelite population. After that, I did an episode on how many times in the Bible Jewish people married non-Jewish people. And I want to take that idea that we have initially an inbred population that then outbred with all the people around them and talk about the genetics of the Jewish race.
So I find it really interesting that individuals are doing studies on the genetics of the Jewish race. So this individual would be Dr. Robert Carter, MD. What I'll be doing today is comparing his work with Dr. Nathan Jeanson's work, which he did also a series on the genetic information of the Jews. So I think it's very important. So we'll be putting that as in a comparison. Can we identify the Jews genetically? And looking at what this geneticist says. So this is going to be a head-to-head comparison with geneticists. Do they agree, right? Do they come to the same terms when they dig at these things? You're going to see some very interesting statements being said, but we're going to obviously do a review on what he be saying here, what he's going to say.
Are they different? Are they special? Is there a Jewish gene? Can we identify Jewish people based on their DNA? Those are excellent questions, and we have a model population here because we have a very good history of the Jews of today. We know where they came from, we know how they were founded, and things like that. So this is a genetic question that we can address. It's very, very interesting. However, the genetics of modern day Jews is going to be overwhelmed by recent events. It's going to be very difficult to get down into ancient history and say, is this Abraham's Y chromosome? Is that Jacob's Y chromosome? Because when you have a population that has intermarried with a lot of other people and a population that has gone through population bottlenecks from time to time, well, random events tend to dominate. And if just at random, one of the founders of the post-Jewish bottleneck population had a different set of genetics than Jacob's genetics, that person might dominate today. It's even possible that Jacob's Y chromosome is completely lost. I don't think so, but
So I'm going to get right to the ending of what Nathan basically goes to a summary of. Now, the reason why this is important, because he makes a very major conclusion. And one of the major things that he does make, I'm not going to talk about right now, but I want to talk about what he does say at the end of his conclusion. His conclusion, he has a very important statement that he makes. And I want to just play that real fast after this part right here. So he makes a little conclusion. I'm just going to let the conclusion play. Because just like what this one said here, you can have a bunch of things that happen in time and then lose the original people, right? That's very important.
Europe would eventually push back out. They move into parts of North Africa, the geographic, along with many other Middle Eastern peoples, heritage. They trace some of them in this episode is necessarily occupy much attention discovered. Could we find the Mosaic lineage discovered? Politically, they don't play a huge role in Europe, but in terms of their DNA, massive echo in Europe in the Middle East, significant imprint in India, and even now in North Africa. But could there still be an ancient Jewish lineage that we haven't yet discussed or haven't yet discovered? Could we find the Mosaic lineage, going back to Moses and Aaron, David, Solomon? Hope you join us in future episodes.
So he makes a great conclusion there that he himself, right, at that time could not find that haplogroup, but I do have some information that we're going to talk about with his findings. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But let's continue with this.
Mathematically and statistically, it is possible. So we have to walk through this carefully. If you just consider where Jewish colonies popped up in history, we have Jewish people living in Africa, all the way across North Africa, Algeria, Libya, Morocco, Tunisia, down into Egypt, Ethiopia, and way down into Southeast Africa. There are Jewish people popping up in Asia, Asia Minor, that's modern-day Turkey, the Levant, which is Israel, Syria, Lebanon, that area, Yemen. In fact, the Yemeni Jewish population is one of the oldest ones. Baghdad, Iran, India, even as far as Burma. Now, the Burma population, they followed the colonial trading routes. It's one of the more recent populations, but they did get that far, and there's a Jewish community there, at least there was. In Europe, we have Jewish people living in Spain, Italy, Sicily, and the Italian Jews are mentioned in the Bible, so we know they were living there, but all the way across the northern Mediterranean, up into Central Europe. These people are really interesting. Are they consistently similar in their genes? That's an honest question, and we can answer that question now with modern genetics. But amongst these many different populations, some were founded by few individuals, some were founded by many individuals, some were subjected to influxes of other individuals, like when Ferdinand and Isabella kicked out the Jews from Spain in 1492. Well, a lot of those Jewish people that didn't want to convert and didn't want to die, they went to North Africa and brought a huge influx of Sephardic DNA into the North African Jewish population.
Let's quickly talk about that, because I think that topic is very important. I think it's a topic that every geneticist, almost every geneticist, and when they study history, they know that the Jews went to San Tome. That's just a very important one, right? I just want to get this one out the way because I think it's important. This one I didn't even open. I got to make sure I open this one up. Let me just grab a note here and go to something on this. Now, as always, when doing these things, it's about being unbiased and it's about examining these things fairly, right? And it's about also knowing the history, the truth about it and whatnot, and putting these things sometimes side by side. I'm just going to go to something on this little note here, go down to something. Now, what he said was a very important historical quote. When I say historical quote, that was a decree, a well-known decree by the kings of Spain, right? And they had instructions on that decree. That decree actually had instructions for where the Jews could go. I'm going to read something from this little piece right here. It just talks about a decree. I'm opening up what it is right here. Just going to show what it is, and I'm going to show this little spot right here. The reason why it's important because that's where the Jews were sent. When the Jews of San Tome, when they were sent down, a lot of people, they don't know, but they only had just a few choices. And one of their few choices was basically 2 places in Africa. So here's the decree. So it was a Portuguese decision that was made in 1492, right? It just says the Portuguese decision followed an identical legal act, right? Talk about the decree in 1492, right? Signed by the Catholic kings and everything and whatnot. Now, what's important is, right? This is Spain. This is going to be about the Jews and about the Moors, right? But what they come to is a conclusion right here. It says after that period, so they actually had only 8 months to stay there and whatnot. They had to pay a toll and they gained them 8 months. And it says right here, after that period, they had to leave the country, although the king only allowed them to travel to these 2 places, right? I had talked about these places before, but I'm going to show them on a map. These are the 2 places that the Jews of San Tome, right? Well, Jews of San Tome. We'll get to San Tome. But the Jews of Spain had 2 ways of exit, right? That's very important. Here into Africa, and he had another way of entrance, well, exit. And we'll have this one right there. So they had two ways, two places to go to exit. That's very important because the Jews were sent into Africa, right? But there's a more well-known story of the Jews that went into San Tome. And that's also what he will talk about here. And we'll talk about that as well. But before he even does, let me just show you this. So any geneticist who's a geneticist who looks at the history of San Tome and knows about the Jews, they should consider the study that they did on the Jews of San Tome. The reason why is because the information behind that study cannot be ignored just because the results aren't to someone's favor. The reason why is because the history and the way they did the study is important to know, that they did the study in connection with historical documents. That's what makes it important. But they just didn't find what they wanted. I guarantee you if they found what they wanted, they would have brought it out and said, well, we found Jews on this island. But they did find Jews, but they just don't like what they see. Let me just show you what it says right here. The reason why it's important. I'm just going to read something from this little quote right here from the results from the Jews of San Tome. Just going to go up before we go to that. All right, so it talks about basically certain requirements for the tests that they had did, right? They just talk about the genetic impact of the historical Jewish migration to San Tome, right? San Thomas, right? San Tome. Just to show that, right? It's just this little island at the bottom of Africa, right down here, right? Right there, pretty much. So that's going to be San Tome Principe. That's going to be an island that the Jews were sent to. So that's very important. So a lot of times the Jews were sent into Africa, right? Guinea, right? Guinea, the name of Guinea actually means black, pretty much, dark skin. But this is actually very important to understand that this is a truth. Let's go back over here. Watch what it says here. We selected a sample of unrelated. This is what they said about the individuals that they were getting this, because every time they do a DNA sampling, they have to write like a summary of what they're doing, right? They can't just like, here's what we got. And we're just going over there getting random people. But what they believe they had was unrelated individuals based on the following criteria. This is what makes this DNA test important, the criteria, right? Sharing surnames with those included in the historical reports of the Jewish migrants. They got to have the same surname, right? They got to be related. They got to have a relation with the name of the individuals that's documented sent over there, because they documented all these things when they sent them over there. Showing cultural practices, obviously, in the way that the Jews were doing, right? So some getting away with still practicing Judaism, because when they were sent to the island, it's because they were being converted to Catholicism, right? We see that in different parts where it says the Jews, the children were taken there 2000, and they were basically forced to practice Catholicism, right? And another thing about this is something that's commonly not taken into account, which is the women. Showing culture practices, we already seen that one, right? But it says both maternal, which is the females, and the parental lineages were investigated using complete mtDNA control, right? Using the complete mtDNA control region, right? That's very important, along with obviously examining who was there. What makes it important is because they're examining the Jews that were sent there, men and women. And what they find is not to anyone's liking, but what I'm going to show today is that though a geneticist may not like the results, he has to admit to the truth. You have to understand what I'm saying when I go over this. I'm going to show you something deep today. I got a note. So right here, E1B1A, obviously they found mostly E1B1A there. There was an empty island. They know that the Jews went there, and they know that their genetics matches that. You know what's interesting? What I also started to learn when I was starting to examine many Hebrews, when I say Hebrews, the real people also have R lineages in it. Now, I used to think this was a mix, but I found many different ones with L groups, R lineages with L groups, and to a high number. Now, the reason why I say that, because do you remember of old in the scripture what it said about Egypt? It said something really interesting about Egypt, and I talk about it quite often, that Egypt, right? Egypt itself, it was a promise that was said in the law. This is what it said. This is what it said in the law. It said that the person, who would be basically a Egyptian. An Egyptian can be brought into the congregation in third generation. Why do you think it says in the third generation in the scripture? Why do you think it says an Egyptian or an Edomite can be brought into the congregation in the third generation? Right. I'm going to go to that scripture just so you know what scripture I'm quoting here, I'm talking about. Let me actually go to, or let me just say it, Deuteronomy 23, 7 to 8, right? Deuteronomy 23, 7 to 8, that's what I'm talking about. Remember how it said the Egyptians can become part of the congregation of the people? Now, you know what's interesting about that? Have you ever looked at the genetics of the Egyptians? Now, that was an interesting study that someone had. And they basically had brought out this information that was in 2020 about some different Egyptians, like different mummies that they find and stuff. So they found some mummies there. They found, this is ancient times, they found E1B1B mummies of Egypt, and they found R lineages. Now, what's interesting about the R lineage, which this person also thought was interesting as well, is that this R lineage has an L3 with it. Now, I had talked about it before, and I'm going to talk about it today about the L3. The L3 lineage is the one that's usually, is the one that you'll usually see with the E lineage, right? That's very important, is that the E lineage usually has an L3, but we see a R1B lineage. And I also looked it up. To see if it was true. And I found it. Here it is. RM269 with a L3. I thought that was very interesting when I noticed that, because it shows you that the nations, right? Israel is mixed, right? There's a mix in Israel, because we know that it says the Egyptians will be part of them. And we know, as it says, even with Edom will be part of them. But we know that the scattering had happened. Judah was selected and they were sent into captivity again, right? Now, what's important about this piece of information here is that this shows us that that mixture of peoples was mixing early. This mixture is 2,400 BC, right? This is very early on, right? In Egypt. That's very interesting. That's very interesting. The reason why I wanted to show that real fast is just because I think that sometimes when you see these groups on here, it might not all be, what's the word I'm looking for? They're not all, what's the word I'm looking for? They're not all like recent, right? We know V88, that's from the Chads, right? But some of them are going to be different groups, right? Other R's, but they always had like R's or E's, things like that. The reason why I say that, because anyone who has already dug deep into this information, you probably came across different R's and different E's when looking at these things. And notice the female lineages, right? We still see the same female lineages, right? L0, L1, L2, L3, L4. The reason why I say it's important, because when looking at these things, it is better if we examine the truth. The reason why, because get this. Remember how I was talking about how the ancient E is Euro-Asian? The oldest, I'm going to do a video right after this just on this find that I forgot where I put it. But the ancient E, I want to show you the oldest E you've ever seen. The oldest E group, and I mean the oldest fossil. I mean, I already have some old ones, but I mean the oldest E you ever seen in Europe. The oldest E group that you ever seen in Europe. This was one more I was just trying to make sure I grab, but I'm going to show you something. So these are going to be some really interesting excavations that they had and everything over here. And I'm going to show you what they found there. So here's the haplogroups that they found. Check this out. 15 to 16,000 years ago. And what they found there, and this is where this is. Let me just copy this and see if I could just show you. See that E right there? You see this year right here? Let me just show you something. Let me just, if I could put it on here, or if it'll show. All right, so check this out. This is where that was found. This is where that ancient E was found. Why is E even called an African haplogroup? We're talking now, if you already seen, a lot of people, they struggle with trying to make the Moroccan Iberians and make them, a lot of people try to say they were here first, but we know they wasn't there first, because the female lineages contest that they were not African. The female lineages contest that they were actually Eurasian. and they came down over there. And they was first Natufian, which the Natufians had that mix with them. But what's interesting is I've been talking about this, that this E, this certain E, which is the origin of the E, was found over here in Germany, but right about where Germany is, over here where Poland is, and all these little areas. So this would be one of the oldest E's that will be classified as a fossil. This automatically makes the E lineage have a back migration. That's very important. That this is one of the oldest E's that I found. This is one of the oldest E's that I found. So I'll as always, I'll put these things in the description afterwards. But you can notice these things, with a V3A mtDNA. That's really interesting. Right? V3A mtDNA. Let me go to Wiki. Or I'll just go to this one just for the sake, I guess. This one has a little information, but I want to go to it on Wiki. Let me go to it on Wiki. Just because it will have a direct little piece. Let me just put V. All right. Just show you this real fast. So this is the mtDNA that it has. Let me just, it doesn't show the descendants, but it has descendants, but its ancestor, what's interesting is V comes from H, right? V comes from H. Let me just show it. This is just very important. This means that this already has a sub branch from H. That means it was already connecting with the H haplogroup. That means it's up there in Europe. That's just important to know that by its mtDNA, it witnesses that it was up there as well, right? 16,000 years ago. But let me find something real fast and show that on this little thing, because I like to also show these things on these trees. All right, so right here, let me just open this. The reason why I kept this one is because I like this little picture, because it also shows you where the haplogroups usually are found in modern day. Obviously, you got to know that even when looking at these things, we got to know where these ancient things come from and everything. Origin story. That's what we find here. We find the origin stories of things, deep origin stories. But look at this. You see this group right here? This is going to be of R, right? Because there's 3 groups with the female lineages. There's L's, there's M's. So everything under this is M, and then there's N. L, M, and N is with the female lineages. L, M, and N. But notice over here under N, you're going to get a group that's under R. And under R, you're going to see a group that's H. So you see this H right here. So this H, underneath the H, you're going to see a V, right? V and H, these are actually going to be highly related. So a European female lineage, or a female lineage, whether it's say European or not, but being in Europe, a female lineage is also found with the E group at its oldest origin, And and obviously they get older than that too. They get older than that. But this right here would be considered a direct fossil to date. You see what I'm saying? That this E group would be considered Eurasian. That is not actually first starting in the land of Africa, but is actually starting outside of Africa, right? With a V3A, right, haplogroup of female lineage. Obviously, they get later to get certain lineages, and they remain with that. Usually the E group, you're going to see with L3s and L2s, L1s, things like that, of that sort. But this is really interesting. A VA group. Why is it that the E group is considered African? But we got ancient, because what I'm showing you here is some of the most ancient finds of Indo-European lineages. Like, for example, here, you can see basically where it talks about, I'm going to open this up real fast. You can see what's going on here. Just going to go over. You can see these years. I just moved up fast right here. These are going to be these years right here. But notice what groups it is. So your G's, right, and F's and things like that. And then you'll see some, different classic Indo-European lineages. But you see your I's, your G's, and F's. So that's just very important. But there was an E that was found there. And that's what makes it really interesting. when looking at those things. So that's like 15, 16,000 years ago in fossils. So I just want to close that real fast. So, and then also with that female lineage contest to where she would be. So you can see that circle there, that circle right there. So Europe. So that's really interesting. That's really interesting. That's just like if someone was to say that group in general, right? I just thought that was interesting. Now, going back over here, let's talk about this real fast. So the reason why I want to show that, because I want to give a little understanding that, yes, Israel is a group that people also mixed in with Israel. Yes, it's true. But we also got to understand which one would be considered the bloodline, right? I wouldn't say the R lineage is the bloodline, but I would say that they would be a persons that apparently got mixed in with Israel. But we got to understand without a doubt. I'm just going to close this, or I'll leave that there because that's just something we got to understand without a doubt when we think about different lineages. Like, for example, I'm just going to go up real fast. I finally figured out how to use this thing. I know you can reset the list right here, but I just want to show a little bit here real fast on just some groups that they say usually are, African. Like, for example, the mtDNA lineage of L1, right? We can see that in different places and whatnot, but I'm going to go down and just talk about one. So right here, this one's one, but this is not one I'm looking for. Let me see where it is. A matter of fact, I'll just keep going. I want to show you this one that I found. Well, I found a few. I found a few in far locations of lineages that are said, what's the word I'm looking for? They're said African. Now, the reason why I say that is because I've been saying this for a while. You take the biblical narrative, you understand it. No one started in Africa. No one. No people started in Africa at all. That's important. There are lineages that are more older in Africa, like the A and B lineages, but no one started in Africa. I'm trying to see where is that. Maybe I'll find it later because I want to focus on this video, and maybe I will make a little concentrated thing on this. I'll make a little concentrated thing on that a little later. But this thing I already showed when I talked about pretty much, with L1. I don't know, this one's taking a little hard to find, but like L3 and things like that of that sort. Just go up here and just show, right? L3 at its oldest, 9,000, right? 9,000 BC, Syria. You can see what's going there. Pre-pottery, Neolithic B. You can see it in different places, right? We had talked about how they found it in Israel, right? It was one of those ones that was over there in Israel, right? I'm going to close this because I'll use this a little later and everything. But that's what we had talked about last time, right? We talked about that when we talked about E1A and E2 that we found L3 in Israel. I just want to show that because I think it's important to look at the information completely look at the information. And I think a lot of people aren't doing that when they're looking at these things. So that's why I wanted to just point this out real fast, that in San Tomé, Principe, I'm pretty sure you're probably looking at the real Israelites without a doubt, especially when you look at the information on there. I say that because we're going to continue with this video, and I'm going to show you as we break down this little video, and I'm going to show you what's going on here.
Our Middle Eastern people group, as expected. They have a lot of gene. Can we identify Jewish people based on their DNA? Those are excellent questions, and we have a model population here because we have a very good history of the Jews of today. We know where they came from, we know how they were founded, and things like that. So this is a genetic question that we can address. It's very, very interesting. However, the genetics of modern day Jews is going to be overwhelmed by recent events. It's going to be very difficult to get down into ancient history and say, is this Abraham's Y chromosome? Is that Jacob's Y chromosome? Because when you have a population that has intermarried with a lot of other people and a population that has gone through population bottlenecks from time to time, well, random events tend to dominate. And Egypt, Ethiopia, and way down into Sudan, India, even as far as Italian Jews are mentioned in the Bible, so we know they were living there, but all the influxes of other individuals, like when Ferdinand and Isabella kicked out the Jews from Spain in 1492, well, a lot of those Jewish people that didn't want to convert and didn't want to die, they went to North Africa and brought a huge influx of Sephardic DNA into the North African Jewish population. Some of these populations, they remained small for a long time, and some of them grew, but in each one of the populations, there is evidence of what's called endogamy. That is, people only interbreeding with people from their local population. So we can see characteristic groups of letters in the genomes of, let's say, the Jews of Algeria versus the Jews of Yemen. So endogamy is a natural thing that pops up when you have an isolated community where people are marrying people from within that community mainly. If you look at the Y chromosomes, we find that Jewish men from around the world contain a diversity of Y chromosomes, not just one, but many. We're talking about group J, group E1B1A, E1B1B. One of those is 95% of African men belong to that group. R1A, in fact, 30% of Ashkenazi men belong to group R1A, which is associated with Southern Asia mainly. R1B, I have an R1B. R1B is 80% of Western European men belong to that group, and a lot of Jewish men also. Group Q, which is strongly associated with Native Americans. Group I, Group G. So we see that there's a lot of different Y chromosomes within Judaism. We see that.
So what do you think he's talking about when he says a lot of different Y chromosomes in Judaism? Let me just show you something. So in the Jewish group, this is why it's very important whenever people say who is a Jew, you're never going to have one right answer. You're just going to have a bunch of different answers. You're never going to have one right answer. Like if I just say that they're only this or only that, you'll be wrong. They're multiple things at the same time. That's what makes them who they are. That's what makes them an ethnic group of Jewish people, right? But really, what I'm going to show you today is when you break it down and see the full picture, it's no doubt that when you're looking at these things, you want to be careful because that's what Dr. Nathan Jeanson, we're going to obviously put him some information that he has on these things. What happened is when you look at these mixes, it's because the female lineage, and that's what he's going to talk about, and we're going to talk about that too. We'll talk about the female lineage and what happened, how that mixed like that. Just looking to see if I close this one note or if I left it. I'm going to just open this note here. So I need a, matter of fact, I'll open it when my mind remembers when it happens, because he says certain things that it's gonna just happen. We're just gonna go to it. We're gonna go to obviously the deep roots of this, but you notice what he just did here? Do you know what this is? He's a geneticist. He knows without a doubt what this is. This is called an unrooted chart. This is what you want to see when you're breaking down these Y chromosomes. A and B are one, D and E are one, and then C and F under here is F. All these are one with F. How do we know that F makes all of these? F makes all of these, right? F makes all of these lineages, right? If you want to understand it, just remember this, right? A and B are him. D and E is Shem. And everything after F, right? C and F, everything after F are one. F goes all the way up to T, right? And we know that because I already had a conversation with a geneticist. Everything that I show always usually is going to be quoted directly from a geneticist or from actual sources. So very important. I'm going to read something real fast. Watch what it says right here. So a few questions and just to get the answer. So this is why I asked. Yes, then it's correct to say F-M89 is a grandfather of HIJK, but not A and B nor D and E. And the geneticist said yes. I got multiple quotes where different geneticists, different specialists. This is one person, Robert. Got one from Christina. She says yes, FM89 makes all those groups. We can see that it was the grandfather of it. We also have, I think this is still, this is another person, Kashmir, and she says right here, right? They just let us know that IJK are a person. The reason why that's important, because I'm going to show you IJK is a person. One person is IJK. but they come from FM89. And the reason why this is important because while E is there, F and G exists. So if E is there with F and G, that means F and G is one family. G, H, I, J, K are one, right? That's very important. But we'll get to that as we go over these things, as we talk about the G group, because make G monophylactic, and that's what we're going to do. So you want to make G monophylactic, you're going to see what is all one with it. So it's very important to see. But you'll notice that E, right, same time E exists, all these lineages exist. So that means that E is a brother lineage of these lineages. So if we know them with their brother lineage, then we're going to note that C and F are Japhetic. But you're going to see this as we go over it, as we go over these things, that we're going to bring these things home, also with using Dr. Nathan Jeanson and his findings with these things. But this is called an unrooted chart. That's what we talk about. We go over those things and whatnot. That is important to know that. So unrooted chart. Shalom, family. Shalom, shalom. Amen, amen. Looking at seeing how everyone's doing. Any questions, anything at all? Examine this closely. It's going to be very deep. Let's keep on going.
There's a lot of different Y chromosomes within Judaism. That should not be a surprise considering my last episode and my article on creation.com documenting how many times we see people from outside of Israel intermarrying with an Israelite.
Just to make it clear, that makes no sense. You know what he just said? Let's understand what he just said. As a geneticist, he should be ashamed of what he just said. What he just said was because the men were mixing with women, they got more male chromosomes. That is a ridiculous statement. That's not the reason why they got all these chromosomes. The real reason why they got all these chromosomes is because they're not the Jews. That's the real reason, is that the female lineages that they have there are confirmed. We're going to talk about it as we go closer and closer to this. And we'll talk about the female lineages and how we know that the females that they got with, they cannot use their females. That's what brought them together. That the men were mixing with Israelite females. Watch when we examine these female lineages. It's going to be very important to understand that these were not Israelite females, and they know it. In fact, I'll show you a geneticist that one word for word will tell you that the female lineages that were with the Ashkenaz are 81% or even more percentage of European. That's very important. But the male lineage is the reason why it's mixed like that is because this was an old mix. This was a mix that was seen all the way in the time of Canaan, all the way in the time of ancient times. I'm talking very ancient. We already went over it when we talked about Ebla and the Amorites and the Kassites, right? We talked about all those things when we talked about these groups, right? Very important. But let's keep on going. I just want you to understand that this mix isn't because they were mixing, men were mixing with different women. This is multiple men. This is different men. So that's just very important to understand as we go over these things.
Lots of Y chromosomes should have bled into the population, just like the Jewish Y chromosome should have bled out of the population. I mean, consider the sons of Abraham from Keturah that he sent to Arabia, or consider when the northern tribes of Israel were destroyed and spread out across the Assyrian Empire. Well, that brought all those Y chromosomes across a vast swath of the Middle East. So we don't expect a specific Y chromosome or specific letter even to say this is a Jewish person. You can't do that. But statistically, you can say these are more common. Therefore, it's more likely that these genes belong to the original Jewish population. Now, within that Y chromosome, there's...
Now, the question is, even Dr. Nathan Jeanson already addressed it. Can you identify the Jew genetically? Yes, you can do that. It's definitely possible, right? It is a possible feat to do. And that's what the examination is going to be today. But let's continue.
There's a very interesting specific Y chromosome. It's called the Cohen modal haplotype.
All right, so here it goes. So this is why we had to talk about this, because every time they do this, they always bring out the CMH group. And that's why we're going to talk about this, and we're going to make it monophylactic. And I'm going to show you this. You don't even need a source to go over these things. But if you understand what a monophylactic group is, you start from the root and you work your way down. And that's what we're going to do today when we go over these things. But notice that they always use the J. I'm sure there's some people that's like, you guys always go over the J. You always go over these things or whatnot. But the reason why this is important, because this supposed to be obviously anyone who understands real genetics is not the same thing as someone who tries to throw in and say, oh, you're counting generations or counting genealogies, things like that, or endless genealogies. No, it's the root. Any geneticist who would tell you what geneticist is looking at the root of a person. Your DNA is in every aspect of your body, from your hair tips to your nails, to every single piece. But they got to go and get it a certain way from like old ancient corpse. They got to get it from like inside the ear and certain things like that. But this lineage right here, the CMH model, is one of the models that is just not right at all. It's not right at all. And I'm going to show you that today, that this lineage today, if you want to really understand it, I'm going to show you something in connection. And I'll show you when it says right here that his age is 90, is this age. Well, what if we connect it to his parent lineage? And that's what I'm going to show you today. As we connect this to his parent lineage, I'm going to show you that this lineage that they keep saying is a, what's the word I'm looking for? Is a Jewish lineage. It's not a Jewish lineage. It's just not. It's just not a Jewish lineage. If it was, then amen. It would be a Jewish lineage. But when you look at the whole picture for what it is, let me just go over here. If you go to the whole picture of what it is, you'll notice something very important, which I'll get there when he starts. Well, in fact, he's already there. He's already talking about J. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about this real fast. The reason why this is important, because what I'm going to show you real fast is a very interesting conclusion. Let me just go over here and let me talk about this real fast. Let me just go to something on here. I'm going to go to this, back to this note, but I'm going to read you something that's very important about haplogroup G, which is also with the Ashkenaz, right? G is right there, but J is right here. But J and G are highly connected. I'm going to show you that. J and G is extremely connected when looking at these things. Let me just go back over here. So I'm going to come back over here. I'm just going to start at the starting point. So you can see it's going to be a very early in the age. I'm going to click this. All right. So this is going to be our starting point. So this is going to be the earliest J ever found, right? This is going to be the earliest J. And I'm going to show you where it connects at. You see this location and this place? It's going to be very important to note. I'm going to show you something real fast. Let's go over here, or more or less over here. All right. So I'm going to read something. This is going to be something I'm going to come back to, because this is just something that's important to note for why is the, like, I also should have mentioned that. I'm going to talk about the Lemba too. But let me talk about this G. What's important about this G is that it has connection. I'm just going to read right here. During the early pre-pottery Neolithic period, right? You can see right here, what time frame is that? 9,500. Why is that important? Because when we talk about the CMH lineage, it has a connection. It talks about right here. If you do not have an oral tradition, being this one might not, it says your deepest ancestor was likely part of the Neolithic farming expansion that began about 9,500 years ago from the Fertile Crescent. So let's understand what's going on here. What are they talking about? That's the earliest one, right? Because sometimes you'll notice that the time of the fossil and the time of the summary of the conclusion will be a little off, but it's about the same meaning, right? The one that I'm showing you with this fossil, back to over here, the one I'm showing you with this fossil right here, right? You can see right here, 13,000 years before present, right? You see what's going on there. And this is going to be in the Caucasus right here. We're going to see, do they go down or do they go up? Now, it's interesting that they start here, but do they go down or do they go up? That's very important. Do they go down or do they go up, right? And watch what it says here. Haplogroup G, M201, right, occurred in Georgia, right? 30% in Georgia and everything. Talks about is over there in the Caucasus Mountain. What's important, it says the overlap of J and G lineages, right, with geography and whatnot, it just lets us know that they're about in the same area, is what it's basically saying here. Let me actually go up here, because I think let me just copy this real fast, or click this and show you something, because my copy paste wasn't not the best right there. But let me show you something. Let me just show you something, because I think it's important when going over these things to know a little bit about what is said, what they usually make a conclusion off of a lot of things. Like, look what it says about M201. Let me show you something what M201, what it says about M201. So M201 has a very well conclusion. This is what it says. G, right? The haplogroup G, M201, is a human Y chromosome haplogroup. It is one of the two branches of the parent haplogroup GHIJK, right? And the other being HIJK. So GHIJK and HIJK, these are related, right? Think about that. IJK, right? Including T. That's very important. The reason why I'm showing you that is because, remember, G comes from GHIJK. G comes from GHIJK, right? That's very important, right? And it lets us know that G and J are connected. They're actually fairly correlated. But what's important is they talk about, basically, you know, when they talk about these different haplogroups and everything, sometimes they make some very important summaries. This is going to be haplogroups that they found in Anatolia. Now, in Anatolia, they found obviously a mix of different groups, right? E's and G's and J's and I's and L's and N's and K's and everything. Now, that's great and all to find them in certain locations and whatnot. But what you want to know is where they go. What's the direction? What's the direction that they go? And the direction that J goes, if we just go to its next stage, right, in the Mesolithic, we can know it goes two ways. And let's see what happens here. Right here, we have a location here. This location, let's just zoom out a little bit, is all the way over here by Finland. So you see what's going on there? And then if you go to the next one, right here, you can see this one's also by Finland. So that's important. This means that this was an ancient Indo-European lineage before it came down. So it's going to start coming down. So in the Mesolithic time, it was up there, right? It was up in these areas. So one here and one here, right? And then they end up going downwards. That's important because we also had noted, if you've seen that video on the Amorites and everything, they become the groups of the Amorites, right? They come and they sit in these upper areas and they be up here for a long time. It's Amorites. That's very important because the Amorites also became Canaanites. That's very important. The Amorites took over all these areas of these lands. That's very important, right? Said to Abraham, right, that the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full, right? That's at that time frame. That would be way too early for Israel to be there. So these little areas, the reason why this is important is because when noting these things, what's important is the place of origin. So remember, it began here and went upwards. Why is that important? Why is that certain location important and everything? Let me just show you something about a certain location that's very important. So there's a place, I don't know how you say it, Gulf tape, something like that. Basically, it lets us know it's one of the oldest places. They say, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? A temple, right? They say it's a really old place and everything. And they say that it was 10,000 years ago. Now, what's interesting is that civilization, that was an old civilization. It was destroyed, or left abandoned. But that civilization is where we find the J, and that J went upwards. But that civilization is not like a biblical civilization, but we know it exists. When I say biblical, it's not like somewhere that, you know, the Israelites would be, but it will be a location where it is moved. Now, the reason why I say that's important is because the certain pinpoint is not just J, but he's actually pinpointing JP58. And JP58, when you examine it closely, fairly, it leads us in a route that is an Indo-European lineage. And I'm not the only one that's saying this. Dr. Nathan Jeanson himself also illustrates this. I'm going to come back to this note. I'm just going to leave this note here because I just want to show this note real fast before we get on it. I'm just going to leave this here because this is something to get into afterwards. I'm just going to close those things real fast. I'm going to show you what Dr. Nathan Jeanson says real fast on these things. So just a little bit from him.
But could there still be an ancient Jewish lineage that we haven't yet discussed or haven't yet discovered? The history of this lineage comes from a study that didn't even sample the Middle East. This first study we looked at early on in these episodes, the 1,000 Genomes Project, the one that sampled the major locations of where the people are, didn't even have lineages in the Middle East. Yet it did have members of Group J. And this was historically, in my own study of the Y chromosome, one of the first studies I examined and one of the first puzzles I had trouble solving. Group J in this study is heavily populated by, if you can just see the colors here, gold and green, Europeans and peoples of South Asia. We'll zoom in here just momentarily so you can see them. Yes, you have peoples in the Americas, but again, I think this is carryover from Europe. Sadly, most Latin Americans have European ancestry, not indigenous American, because the die-off of these peoples after the arrival of Columbus. So even though they're gray here, Native American, so-called Latin American, actually this should be gray as well, this Colombian. But for that matter, that we could cover explanation at present for this Group J, not Arab Muslims. So these peoples, even though so let's watch this history again with one map to make it even clearer, because the Turkish peoples, in my view, are the best explanation at present for this Group J, not Arab Muslims. So these peoples, even though I think Turkish peoples as here, yet history, their origin is not there. It's in Central Asia in the 600s. Turkish people arise in Central Asia in the 600s. Some of these people begin migrating to Europe in the 700s, which is why I think we see some of the echo and the splits between Europeans and Indian peoples at that point in time. There's another split that happens, the Seljuk Turks, which give rise then to the modern Turkish peoples.
All right, so I'm gonna leave it right there because he's gonna talk about the Turks a little bit about that. We're gonna talk about that because you wouldn't believe it, but do you know that the Lemba has connection to the Ottomans as genetically connection to the Ottomans? And that's what we're going to talk about. Why does the Lemba have what they have and whatnot? It's actually quite interesting. It's actually a quite interesting story. So I'm going to talk about that as we proceed. Now, I just want to show that because the route is that they started here and they went upwards. And we know that they also had settled in areas of, I'm going to zoom out. They also had settled in areas of Turkey. So right here, you can see very early on, all the way over here, right? That's what he was talking about in that time, right? In the 1615, this BC, right? They was over there at that time. They kept growing. They were still growing throughout time, right? Even through earlier time, right? You got a lot of different lineages of the J that's over there, right? You can see right here, right? The one that Nathan was talking about, the one in 600s pretty much. I'm going to actually close this now and I'm going to go. The reason why I'm showing you that because Dr. Nathan Jeanson, he concluded that J and I are Indo-European. Now, he did an intensive study on J. That's why. He did a deep, major study on it and seen information from genetics that was very hard to find, stuff that's hard to find. And he already concluded that I and J are one. Now, what's interesting about that, he also later concluded that T were Jews, but he also concluded, he tried to mix D and E and A and B and F, G, H all together, which makes no sense because F makes all these lineages and F, G, H, these are going to be Indo-European lineages. G is also highly Indo-European, H as well as in the Indias. That's very important. F is definitely Indo-European. C, they mistakenly made Neanderthals. They mistakenly made an ancient lineage of C1 and C2 Neanderthals. So it's just interesting his choice of letters there. But the interesting thing is I and J, what he did with I and J there. So he knows that I and J is Indo-European, right? I, J, K are one. That's very important. But we also got to understand most of the world believes the out of Africa idea. So they're consciously, automatically, usually going to link certain groups together. That's just one of those things that's just going to happen. And even if you examine Dr. Nathan Jeanson's work himself, in his perfect work, he'll tell you that D and E and A and B are different. A and B and D and E are genetically distanced away from each other. That's very important. But that's one of those things that happens when this was brought out. I'm not going to go talk about it, how he came to his conclusion. this was one of those things that he was getting hammered. He was getting hammered because he made J1P58 Indo-European, or basically, Japheth. And he was getting hammered. The reason why he was getting hammered, because they didn't have no Jews anymore. And so he had to make someone a Jew real fast. But, we can break this down very easily and show how this is not right, right? You can't make all these Jews, all these Shemites, and make these Jews. This doesn't work out at all. But the reason why I want to show you this is because, anyways, IJK, right? T comes from K. IJK are 1. We'll talk about that as we talk about monophylactic groups. So remember, G, this is the root of G. G comes from GHIJK, and then HIJK, that's where H comes from, right? And then notice IJK, these are all people. IJK makes IJ and K groups. So he would say that this group would be Jews, but all these existed at the same time. All these existed at the same time these existed. All these had existed. And we know that the biblical narrative is true. Then we know that Ham, Shem, and Japheth is in authority of existing. So that means that we have to have 3 lineages that are different. So we can't say that this is Noah. We can't say IJK is Noah. And then he only creates these, but not these, right? We got to understand that people, all people today are one. All people today come from Noah, all people today. But you can note the splits, which is at CT and BT, right? So you get different lineages. You get your DE lineages and your CF lineages, right? And your A and B lineages. These are different lineages. And notice what's important is IJK are 1. So if IJ are Japhetic, IJK is the maker of the Japhetic lineage. Therefore, IJK is Japhetic. You see what's going on there? It's automatically like that when that's concluded. That's very important because the father of IJK, the father of JK, or for the father of IJ is IJK. So the father of IJ, which Dr. Nathan Jeanson dubbed as being Japhetic, the father of IJK, HIJK, GHIJK, F-M89 tells us that it's Japhetic. So that's just important because when talking monophylactic groups, that's gonna give us an understanding there that everything under F, which makes all these, F makes all these. So they're all 1. These are actually all one family. That's very important. But D and E, these are different. And A and B is different. You know what's interesting too? I just found, let me just talk about this real fast. I found a C. I found a C group, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit. I don't know what's up with that C group, but I found a Yap lineage of the C. I found a C lineage with a Yap. I don't know what to say about that. Is the C group actually a Yap? So I'm doing a note on that. I'll maybe talk about it later or not. But the C group, I found a Yap lineage in the C group. I found a Yap plus in the C. I thought that was interesting. Maybe I'll give it someone to check out what's up with that, because it talks about C and D might be related. C, D might be related. Now, when I say that, because if it has a Yap group, how to get a Yap group, right? How to get a Yap. Now, the reason why a lot of people might not want to make C related to D, because C is 100% European. Like it's not even from the bottoms. But notice what it says right here. It says haplogroup C Yap plus and D Yap plus. You see what's going on there? So what's up with that? I just want to put that there. Just some interesting little thing. You can see a little information here real fast. So is C related? It's really interesting. Take a note of that. So just put that show that a little bit. Now, the reason why I say that, because if you know the Yap lineage, Yap plus is usually in DE. Yap plus is usually in DE, but we see it also in C. But we know that CF makes C, but C doesn't come from F, right? C doesn't come from F. So C might even be a D in E group. So it might even be A and B is 1, and C, D, E are 1, and then F is his own lineages, because F is his own lineages, right? But C is a different break. So it's very important. So this is actually very, very interesting that I found. I thought that was really interesting. So I just want to put that there. So I'm just doing some information on that with some stuff from 2020. I'm gonna go back over here. I'm gonna go back over here, because what we also got to talk about real fast is the conclusion that he makes. And then actually, I'm going to put this stuff, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm going to put it together so you can see what's going on here. So remember that geneticists, they use unrooted charts. That's what they use. They know how these break and whatnot, but you got to note monophylactic groups if you want to understand what's going on with all these, who's linked with who, right? Who's all related to who. So these all might be one, right? CDE might be one family. CDE just might be one family. And A and B are one family. We know that without a doubt, because A and B doesn't make CT. And E and D are CT. Everything under E and D is one, right? Well, one coming from one break, right? D and E, this is Shemites. Might even include C. That's probably why you find the C with the Natufian. So that might be all one family, without a doubt. But F makes all these, and A and B is own. That's very important. But let's continue on. Let's continue on, because this is actually going to be very, very deep as it continues and breaking down the conclusions of what you make.
It's a Y chromosome that's found very commonly in men who belong to families with last names of like Cohen and Khan. These are men who claim that they've inherited the priesthood. They're descendants of Aaron, the high priest. They claim.
Man, so you can see, like I said, that's what they claim. They claim that it's from Aaron, the high priest, right? That's what Dr. Nathan Jeanson did a video on, a deep examination. But remember, he found that they were Turks, that they were actually
watch what
Turks.
He basically breaks down. You're not this. Let me go.
This little thing, I'll say that for when we talk about the female lineages. But continue a little bit with this to show you a little more what he's saying here. I'm gonna go to another timestamp.
Thousands. But there's still Turkish peoples left over. The split happens in the thousands, and those who are still left over move down then and are invading, part of the armies that invade India in the 1200s. I mentioned the last episode talking about the Vikings, that there's this general rule of thumb that seems to emerge in the who are modern day.
One second, let me actually close this and open it another. All right. Show the screen real fast. All right. So it's going to be a really deep one, because we're going to actually reveal who actually are the Lemba genetically. I'll put a timestamp after this to go right to that moment. We go right to it. But let's keep on keeping on this. Let me show you this part on this.
Say Jewish people. Well, it seems that the section, I should say, a subsection of modern Jews, along with many other Middle Eastern peoples, and some Europeans, like Greeks and other Balkan Peninsula folks, and Italians, and even some Spaniards at a low percentage, and even some Indians, all share a common Turkish heritage. They trace some of their origins to Central Asia. Not all of these people, but if you're uh, 2009 that came out, claiming they could find one that seemed to fit all the proper parameters for being a Jewish lineage. Episode 18, we walk through some of the problems. The lineage specifically, and this is a direct screenshot from the paper. You may not be able to zoom in and see here. I'm going to try to highlight here. There's a whole bunch of different lineages being shown. There's D, E, C, G, H, I, J, L. There's many of the major groups in this tree that we've seen, and they have arranged by columns here the frequency of these various lineages in various Jewish groups. So this first column, which is headed by the letter C for the Kohanim, those who claim descent from the Jewish priesthood. This I column is just Israelites in general, who don't necessarily claim descent from the priesthood. And here's the percentage overall. The point I was emphasizing in that episode was dealing with one particular lineage, this J. You may not be able to see here because the screen is so small, but it's this J-P58. It's a sub-branch of the J lineage. I went on to conclude that J is probably an echo of the Turkish conquest of the Middle East, going in and then being pushed out by the Mongols and coming back in again. Arabian Peninsula. The geography of the Ottoman Empire overlaps very well here. And the timing of various splits, there's multiple lines of evidence that I think point towards a Turkish origin for much of the modern peoples in these places. Let's zoom out a little bit so we can see Africa and compare it to this E1B1B. If we overlap these two distributions, there's sort of a complementary distribution. In other words, if you think about the history of the Islamic conquests, it's like the combination of J and E1B1B fits the distribution. You have to remember that after Muhammad comes the Turkish peoples, and it makes sense. There's an intriguing geographic correlation that I want to explore further. Who are these E1B1B peoples? So let's go back to the tree.
All right, so I just want to introduce that real fast. You probably already know about that. A lot of people already seen this stuff from Dr. Nathan Jeanson, but I just want to give that understanding that he says truly, he says I and J are one, and he says they are both Japhetic. That I and J is a Japhetic lineage. But the interesting thing is that IJ comes from IJK, and that they're all one family. That's a Japhetic lineage from a Japhetic family. That's just very important. One more piece, 2718.
A letter, number, letter, so forth, as you march downward to the modern era through the tree. In 1800 BC, the major European lineage, I should say the major, what I've called the indigenous European lineage, group I, and the major Turkish lineage, group J, are one. They have not separated. If you look at the family tree, what would become what I'm calling indigenous Europe, and what would become the Turkish people that would be up here in Central Asia, then come marching back through the Middle East in the late era, in the AD time period. On the Y chromosome family tree, they are joined.
That's how monophylactic groups work. Now, he's just showing you how I and J are one. But if you go back, IJK are one, HIJK are one, and GHIJK are one from F-M89. That's very important. But let's proceed.
Now, this Y chromosome is found outside of Israel, rarely. Amongst other Jewish men, rarely. But it's very common amongst this particular group of men who claim to be priests, essentially.
So that's why I was showing you that, because he claims that the J-P59 was rare amongst other groups, but is only found amongst Jews. But that's not true. That is actually found amongst a mesh of different people. That's why I think it's important to understand these things, to go over these things very carefully. That the Turkish lineage that we go over quite often is that it's clearly an Indo-European lineage. Now, I'm hear a little more of this.
So who were they? Some of the other major lineages that would play such big roles later in history.
He just talks about different groups being one and everything. He talks about different ones being one and everything, right? Because all these were all this, which supposedly was all in 18 BC after the flood. All of these came from who's the father of these? Who's the father lineage of H? Make H monophylactic. If you make H monophylactic, all these are one. If you make H's father, who did H come from? H's father is right here. So if H's father is there, and this is H's son, right? This is HIJK's son. That means that these are one family, right? That means that that's a Japhetic line. That's what that means. If they are all one and they were all existing in the 18 BC, it's very important to understand that you're actually looking at a major a major interesting combination. But remember, A and B were different than D and E. A and B are not the same as D and E, but somehow, some way, you'll see a combination combining these ones, and these ones, and G's. Which I'm pretty sure he has G's on here. He combines these, and these, and he doesn't put G. But the thing is, it's interesting because when you look at this very closely, you know who's related. These are all one, and these are most likely related. But these are different. A and B is different. That's just very important. Those are different lineages. So let's get back to over here.
These descendants of the priests. Now, is it true that this is Aaron's Y chromosome? If so, that's amazing. Statistically, maybe not. Because when that population collapsed, if any person was in there who maybe lied about his parentage for political or cultural advancement, because if you claim to be a priest or a Levite, you're a special person. Or maybe there was an affair or a rape, or maybe an adoption. Or consider the Samaritans. There are not many Samaritans left in the world now, but they have a priestly family. And there's a Cohen priestly family, except they belong to group E.
So now he's talking about this group that, if you actually notice, he said group E, right? He's saying the Samaritans and everything. What's interesting about the Samaritans and everything is that they do have a major group E with them, but it's E1B1B, which is actually a more of an Arabian lineage. That's very important. But that's what he talks about on here too. He talks about how that group basically has a large E lineage, right? A large E. And if you look at, like, for example, this, it just talks about genetics and history of the Samaritans and everything like that and whatnot. It just talks about the genetics of the groups and everything and the mixes. I'm just going to go down something here. And then you just see different groups right there. View here. I'm just going to go down right to something here. Let me just make sure. I think I passed it. But basically what it talks about, when you look at these little combinations of these genetics and everything right here, and these little numbers, they got little things where you can actually copy them and basically convert them to what they actually are, the haplogroup. But pretty much they tell you that the D, because you can look it up, it's not too hard to find, but the D and E group is basically what they find there. Long story short, is that when they look through these groups, they'll find D and E, they'll find E, they'll find J, right? And they'll talk about, which one's Jewish, which one's not, and whatnot, and everything on that. So the reason I want to show you that real fast is just because this just has a little extra information. I'll get back to this as we get going. But this is just something that's fairly interesting to know, that there's certain groups of individuals that are said to be one thing, but when you look closely, you'll find different things. Well, I'm gonna leave this over here and go back to that. So he's just talking about how the E group is also found with the Samaritans, who they also have made part of the group that they call basically high priests. But you'll see high priest as R1A, and you see high priest as J, and you'll see high priest as E1B1B, things like that.
Not group J. So if, say, the Samaritans grew and grew and grew into a large population, well, in the future, their priestly clan would belong to a different priestly clan than the Cohen modal haplotype. Is that because someone lied, or is it a mistake, or an adoption, or just random chance? I don't know. I'm just trying to illustrate to say that just because a huge group of these Jewish men have that Y chromosome doesn't mean that is Aaron's Y chromosome. It is likely, however, because of history. Cool. There's another group of Jewish people that aren't really Jewish. They're the Lemba. They live in southernmost Africa, Southeast Africa. Their history says that they were formed when a ship carrying Jewish sailors got marooned on the coast of southernmost Africa, and they couldn't get back home, so they intermarried with the local girls, and they became the Lemba. They have strange dietary habits. They have a Ark of the Covenant sort of a thing. They have a priestly class. And very interestingly, when they looked at the genetics of this group, because almost no one believed that they're actually Jewish. Well, the mitochondria were Bantu. The mitochondrial lineages from the ladies belong to Southern Africans. Okay.
But many of the Y chromosomes.
Know what he just said there. So he declares that apparently seeing the L lineages, they must be African, right? Now we're going to get back to that because he makes the conclusion that the people that left, it was only, he'll say that it was only the people that would be considered men. He said that men left, but we'll get to that when we get to the history.
Chromosomes of this family, of this tribe, belong to the Middle East. And some of them, specifically the ones with the priestly duties, have the Cohen modal haplotype. So it might be that not only did a group of Jewish sailors really did get marooned in southernmost Africa, but it might be that a descendant of Aaron, the high priest, was among them. Looking at the mitochondria, though, we get a little different picture. About half of the mitochondria of Ashkenazi women, those are Jews from Eastern Europe.
All right, so I'm going to leave that there because we're going to get on this on the female lineages too. So I'm going to close these two. So this is what we're examining, right? So, okay, let's get a little understanding. Now, this is what's important. The Lemba, just to show something real fast, right? When they did test on the Lemba lives among certain people, and there's very important history when linking these people together, right? The Lemba, the Rimba, and the Zimba, or the Vimba, these groups are said to be containing Jews within them, right? And if you notice, right, the J group is actually spread across them all, except for the Vinda. Now, the reason why behind these things wouldn't change the fact, wouldn't change the point of the history. Now, I'm gonna get back to here, but first I'm gonna go through the history of it. The reason why is because it's important. I'm gonna begin with this, a little article here. The reason why is because you're going to actually find out that many of the people that went into Africa, yes, a lot of them were slaves. In fact, a lot of people they went into Africa as slaves. So we'll talk about that as we go over these things. So we're actually going to find people in Crete that was sold as slaves into Africa. And that's what I'm going to show you today is people that lived in Crete that were actually sold into Africa. But before I show that, I want to show you that the lineages in the land of Crete, right? When we talk about these lineages in the land of Crete, that we can actually note what they are. It says, in the present study, we explore why basically groups in a few lineages and everything, basically why groups in a few lineages in the eastern half of Crete, right? By basically looking at different groups and isolated groups, right? That's what makes this a really interesting study because they're going all the way back in time and looking at groups on this little island of Crete and noting who's all isolated. Let me just show you something here. The information talk. All right, so right here, going to get a little bit of the Y chromosome from Paleolithic. They're going all the way Neolithic and stuff like that. They're going a long ways back pretty much. But they find multiple different types of haplotypes, right? All these different ones, the ones right here, these numbers right here is what they found. So these are just from the different little areas. So they found basically E1B1Bs, right? They found Gs, they found Js, they found Rs, they found Ks, right? They found Is, right? This is actually very important because they found, they didn't find no Fs, but they found these ones, right? The E1B1B, G, I, J, K, Q, R, and this is like the classic. This is actually a group of what you would say like Ashkenazis. You would say that this is technically a mix of Ashkenazis, is what you'll say. But this is ancient times. This is like an ancient mix that you'll see on the islands of Crete. On the islands of Crete, you'll see a very interesting mix. I'm gonna go back over here or go over here. Now, watch what it says here. Our results uncover significant differences of J2 and R1 haplogroups between the inhabitants of the isolated group, right? That's what we was looking at in the ancient times, right? And those surrounding those different areas, right? In Crete. So just to show that, these are going to be little areas in Crete and everything and whatnot. And it just talks about what they found there. So these haplogroups that you see here, the ones that they observed, this is another little piece. There's a little piece from that little information. You can see right here. Just going to open it up. So here's a little bit of the ones of Crete and everything. And it's going to talk about what they found there and everything. The reason why is because we're going to use this to a little understanding. So they found A, B, C, whatnot. They found your E1, B1Bs and whatnot, and Fs, right? They actually did find some Fs. They found some Ls, some Ms, N, O. They found a lot of different lineages, right? You can see right here, F, G, H, I, Js, right? Ks, L. So Crete was very mixed, right? Crete was a very mixed area for a long time. It was a very, very mixed area for a very long time. Close this. So I just want to show that the reason why is because we'll get back to that. We'll get back to these things and talk about these things. But the first thing I want to show you is this little video here. So let's get a little history, because when you think of the J group, you got to understand the J group is from the Turks. You got to understand that. And there's actually history of Afro-Turks. Let me show you.
What up, African world, and welcome back to another video of African history, illustrative infographics, and resources on African history. All links in the description box below. Most Afro-descendant people in Turkey arrived there during the time of the Ottoman Empire, and some migrated later from the island of Crete. The Ottoman Empire brought in countless amounts of enslaved Africans into Turkey. Most of these enslaved Africans came from Eastern and Central Africa, and some came from West Africa as well. Many of them worked in households and as soldiers for the Ottoman army. In fact, some Afro-Turks throughout Ottoman history rose to high-ranking positions. Unfortunately, most rose through those ranks by becoming eunuchs in the Ottoman palace. The significance of this practice of establishing high-ranking eunuchs can be traced all the way back to Sultan Murad III, as he used them as a political tool in attempts to destabilize the Grand Vizier by introducing another source of power to the capital. There were even some black eunuchs who became judges in the Ottoman Empire.
All right, so now we're getting deep. We're getting deep into the history. So the reason why I'm showing you that, let me just make sure this is what I want. All right, let me just go down here. So the reason why I was showing you that is because I want you to see this little information. So when I was showing you Crete, what's interesting about Crete is a lot of the genetics that you find in Crete, right? You find in ancient Siberia, whatnot. This area, this area is the area of Europe, right? Let me just show it. That's why maps are always important. I probably pronounced that all weird, but let me show you real fast what location this is now. The reason why is because in ancient times, both of those times I just showed you with those genetics were Paleolithic. The people in Crete also, a lot of their genetics went over here. A lot of people over there, their genetics are actually found over there. You can see in this little area, this is another place. This is the Paleolithic, high levels of Paleolithic individuals. All right, just to show that real fast right here. So it's going to talk about high levels of Paleolithic Y chromosome lineages in that area, right? Just close that. And then notice what you see there, right? Almost about the same lineages. You see E1, B1B, you see Gs, you see I, you see Js, right? You see Ns, you see Rs. So you see what's going on there? So very, very important. The reason why that's important is because as we go over these things and talk about these ones in Crete, we can also talk about that they actually become the Minoans. So here, these individuals, these are actually these individuals that are already here and connecting with here, they become the Minoans. Now, if you know what Minoans are, they're ancient Indo-European people. When I say Indo-European, just because, you know, Crete and everything, it's just talk about the Minoans in the Bronze Age, right? Individuals from the land of Crete and everything. The reason why this is important is because you're going to note that these same genetics, we're going to note that they merged with the Ottomans, and you're going to note a movement into the land of basically, how you say, Ethiopia, right? They're going to go into Ethiopia pretty much. You can see they're going to have connections with a lot of different areas and whatnot. And just letting us know that it's a mixture. There's a major mixture in that land. Basically, that's what this is talking about. It's talking about there's basically a major mixture in that land. And this is the haplogroups that they found here. This could be the haplotypes. So that's just a little more extra information. The reason why is because continuing with some understanding on history. So remember that some of the people from Crete joined with the Ottomans. So remember that as we're going to go to another piece of history. So The reason why I showed you that, because those genetics, IJK are 1. I already showed you a little bit on that IJK were 1 and J is confirmed Japhetic. And we also can note them in a place that was a long time ago, and then they go upwards from that place. From that real place they was at, they go upwards from that place. That's very important. So if they go upwards, who in biblical narrative was told to go upwards, or who went upwards in the biblical narrative? The first people that went upwards were actually Japhetic lines, that they stayed upwards. That's just very important. And that's what Dr. Nathan Jeanson was concluding. It's just a truth, right? That's how we can understand the Bible, if we actually believe the truth and go with the truth and hear what's truth, right? Now, this is actually going to be very important, because I'm going to show you how the J got into that area of the Lemba. And I'm going to show you that J is recent. That J group is actually recent in the Lemba group. From Yemen, you're going to note a major time frame. All right, so I'm going to just read something right here. Despite the military buildup, peaceful relations between temporarily established, or basically in the 1900s, they basically found peace and whatnot, certain groups in the Middle East. And in the 1990s, North and South were, for the first time in 300 years, and I'm going to show you what happened 300 years ago and why it was in so much division. And the first time in 300 years, reunited as one country. Obviously, then they split later on, because you see how the world is today. But I'm going to show you something. The reason why I'm going to show you this is because it's important to know. There's a little piece of information here. Just going to show some history of a forgotten war, right? This is a war that is not usually talked about, but this war is highly important. It's going to show you how the Lemba became the Lemba, and who they are. The real story behind them is very important to know. So it's just a little information here. I'm going to go back over here. I'm just going to read you something from it. It's going to go down and talk about this little thing. So basically a little brief history of Yemen, right? After the Islamic conquest, we know that the Yemenis, they were fighting with the Ottomans and everything. That's just one major thing I want to show you is that they were fighting with the Ottomans, and the place of control of the Ottomans has to be known for how it is. We're going to go to the 1500s. It actually begins in the 1500s is when we're going to start seeing this conflict. This conflict is very important because the location and what happens at this location. So this location, just to get a little idea, right? Basically at the horn of where you can see this little area, Sani. This little area is going to be very important because there's going to be a war that happens here. It's going to have connections to a certain group. But a certain group is going to have some major connections with this little area. But let me close that, and we're going to go and see this now. Now, this is going to show basically how the Lemba, right? What's important is when you think of the Turks, they have a majority of the J group, but they also mixed in with some of the groups that were over there in the lands of Crete. A lot of them became slaves and different things like that and everything. This one I'm going to show a little bit of, and I'm going to show you what happened. I'm going to show you the connection of how they got into Africa and a couple things like that. But first, let's start over here. All right, show a little history of this.
Birthplace of the human species and the center of one of antiquity's great empires, the history of Ethiopia is long and storied. When the exploring Portuguese first made landfall in the diminished kingdom of Ethiopia, or Abyssinia, during their early forays into the Indian Ocean, it seemed to them an exotic hermit kingdom hidden from the world and from the passage of time. To them, this was a devoutly Christian kingdom, ruled by the Crusade-era legend of Prester John, surrounded by coastal Muslim states and pastoral tribes. The Prester John myth held powerful sway over Europe for a degree of direct Ottoman support Gran received in the earlier years of his campaign is rather unclear, highlighting another failing of the Portuguese chroniclers that otherwise provide a remarkably detailed account of the conflict. Nevertheless, the devastating impact of Ottoman-made arms is undeniable in the rapid collapse of the Horn of Africa's strongest power. Lebnadengel was held.
So note that the Ottomans had influence down there, because we're going to bring it home. So the Ottomans had influence in the lands of Africa. That's very important. The The Ottomans had a major influence in the land of Africa, and it can't be denied, their influence, especially in the Horn of Africa.
All the way into the 20th century, which is quite impressive. Of course, many different things were happening in Africa during this time, as it's a very broad period. But again, I'll just be highlighting some principal events. I'll also be excluding North Africa, as there's a lot of Ottoman interaction there, and the Ottomans even controlled parts of it at some point. Let's start with the landscape of West Africa. I find it interesting that one of the greatest empires in West Africa, if not the greatest, began to form around the same time the Ottoman leader Osman I was forming the powerful Turkic dynasty around 1299. 64 years before Osman, Sanjata in the shape of a falcon. This account is very interesting because, if indeed true, it shows some sort of connection, although minimal, with Turkic peoples and West Africa in general. The conquest of Constantinople, with Sanjata coming out on top, becoming Egypt. Upon their visit in Mamluk Egypt, many of the Malayan rulers would purchase slaves, and apparently Turkish slaves were among them, according to the Syrian scholar Al-Umari. Rulers would purchase slaves, and apparently Turkish slaves were among them, according to the Syrian rulers would purchase slaves, and apparently Turkish slaves were among them.
All right, so what did it just say? Now, this is important history. What's it saying is, it's saying, I don't know what this individual is putting here, but I don't know what you're doing. But real fast, what happened is the slaves, right? The slaves that were brought into Ethiopia when they were battling, they were also brought to Egypt, right? They were getting people from Crete, right? That were mixed with the Ottomans. Some of them became slaves too. And they end up also merging with the Ottomans. The Ottomans end up going from Yemen and then going down. They're going to also take Yemen, right? But they're down here in Ethiopia in 1500s. In the 1500s, they're down here. And they also are selling many of the Turkish people as slaves, right? They're selling some of the Turkish people as slaves. And who's buying them? The groups that came from Mansa Musa, right? Some of the group of the very powerful kingdoms of Africa that are actually going to take part in buying some of the Turkish slaves, and they're going to go downwards into Africa. That's very important. That's important. So what is a Turk? A Turkish haplogroup is J. So you're going to note a J group as a Turkish group, but many Turks were being sold as slaves. That's very important. Let's keep on keeping on, because it's going to bring it home a little bit when we get deeper into these things. Go down a little bit and continue on.
According to the Syrian scholar Al-Umari, Al-Umari's work is considered by many scholars to be a major source of the Mali Empire in the 14th century. He collected his information from Egyptian officials who had met the great Mansa Musa himself. This is what Al-Umari tells us. The king of this realm sits in his palace on a big dais, which they call Banbi, on a big seat made of ebony like a throne, and of a size for a very heavily built sitter. Over the dais, on all sides, are elephant tusks, one beside the other. He has with him his arms, which are all of gold, sword, javelin, quiver, bow, and arrows. He wears big trousers cut out of about 20 pieces, which none but he wears. About 30 slaves, Mamluk, stand behind him, Turks and others who are bought for him in Egypt. One of them carries in his hand a parasol of silk surmounted by a dome and a bird of gold in the shape of a falcon. This account is very interesting because, if indeed true, it shows some sort of connection, although minimal, with Turkic peoples and West Africa in general.
So there was a connection with Africa and the Turks. So that's very important. The reason why that's important, because it's going to start showing us where that J come from the Lemba. There's different groups with the Lemba, right? Remember I talked about the Remba, the Vimba, Vinda, and all that stuff. The reason why I'm talking about that is because the Lemba, the Remba, and all that, they're just a group of people that end up coming together. They were a group of people that end up coming together. And we're All right, my bad about that. I don't know what happened there. It just closed on me. But we get in some deep information, some very deep, very, very deep information. So we're gonna go to the real history behind it. My thing closed. I gotta open these notes again. I'll just open this one up for now. Let the other ones be. All right, so connection these. Now we're gonna connect the Rimba, the Vinda, the Lemba, and we're gonna get a very important historical connection with these things. And I'm gonna show you something very interesting. So a lot of these things, there's a song that's sung by the Lemba. This is a song. Basically, it's in a Zulu language, right? And they talk about this place called Sina. I'm going to show you something important about Sina and everything. Is in the land of pretty much what you would say Yemen, but it's going to be talking about how basically they went to Africa and whatnot. Let me just go over here. So this is just some information that was for, it was just a lead to something. So this is just some information to something that I was just examining for a lead. But you'll notice that these certain names, this name is actually very important. I'm going to show you something with that. All right. So I'm going to read you something from here. It's from this book. It's from a college. It's a little information for a topic that's talked about. It's going to be from this college here. And it's going to be some information. I'm going to go over here. I'm just going to read what they say right on the little thing. So they just read some quotes. They're going to read some quotes right here. So it's going to talk about certain groups. In fact, let me just read a little bit of what it's talking about so you know what I'm reading here. All right, so just a couple of different groups and everything. Here's it. All right, so it just talks about Christian religion has spread through the centuries and has been accepted throughout the world, right, in Africa. More specifically and everything, just talk about basically places evangelizing and whatnot and everything. I'm just going to go right down when they went to the Lemba area, Lemba and the Vinda and different groups. And they basically talk about their history and they find out some very interesting history that I'm going to just read real fast. I'm going to talk about what they found out. All right, so this is what they found out. They just talk about here. They just talk about different writings and everything. And they talk about the place of origin is the area around the Great Lake of Africa, formerly called this one right here. And they say this little area, this little land, Zindizi. They say that it was called Zindizi, then Zindizi by the ancient Arab explorer. You can see what he writes and everything. He says the leader of basically what you can see right here. I don't know how you pronounce it, but is basically the way that is writing, because when you say Lemba, they don't even have an L. In their language, they don't have an L, but they say it different ways, like Rimba, Vinda, different ways of saying that. Like this is like Vin or Va, Vinda. And I'm not going to try to pronounce these ones, but migrated. What's important is it talks about their migration. They migrated southward about 12th and 13th century and eventually established their home in the present land of Vindaland, right? That's very important. So they established their home and they moved there. What's important is that there's two migrations, right, with the Vinda. There's two migrations that happen with these individuals, right? It is historically not correct to assume that these certain groups, like the ones are, how you say that, Va, Lemba, were among the first groups to migrate to this area. So it's not right to say they first migrate to the area of the Vinda during the 12th and 13th century, right? It says the last group, basically these ones, and the Va Lemba only made their appearance during the 17th century. That's important. So they let you know a group didn't come there. A lot of these groups didn't come there, and the Vinda didn't come there until the 1200s. So that means that the Lemba can't be older than them because they end up dwelling with them. We'll talk about that when we get more on the history, because they end up coming there and supposedly dwelling with the Renda and the Vinda, right? That's very important. But they talk about they migrated too. They migrated in the 13th and the 13th and 12th century. And they say there was another migration of another group that was part of them in the 1700s, right? That's very important. So he just talks about that. He says the fact It's contained in the pages of Moller Malin, that it is the, you say Ben, how you pronounce that, and not the Vinda. It talks about this later group, but not the Vinda, who made their appearance in about 1700s, right? Confused many white writers, including these other writers, whatnot. So some other groups have popped up in that group a little later. The reason why that's important, because I'm going to show you what the genetic studies actually say about the Lemba and the people that left the area of Yemen. But first, let me show you from one of their books, right? Because if you go to, a little bit about the location where the Lemba came from, they tell a story, right? Here's a story from one of the Lemba women. She tells a story to this person. We'll talk about this person. He's a historian. She's talking to a historian. She says, we came from the Israelites. We came from Sina. We crossed the sea. We were so beautiful with beautiful long Jewish noses and so proud of our facial structure. Now, already off the bat, she's given major red flags. One, if you know the history behind the Lemba supposedly say they went over there with no women. There was no women with them. Now, just for her to express how they looked is in itself alone suspicious, highly suspicious. But understanding that a lot of them had that J group. So that's very important. But the women weren't with them. So they say they sing a song, right? We came from Sina and we crossed this little area, right? And we rebuilt Sina, right? But in Sina, they died like flies. You see what's going on there? Because we're going to talk about what happened in Sina. What's the real story behind the place that they left and why they leave, and what's the real history behind that place. So this is just a little information from there and whatnot. But let's keep on going. So I'm going to talk about this. It's going to talk about basically analyzing the Yemenis, right? The female DNA and everything. It's going to suggest multiple migrations events with Africa and West Eurasians. Now, what's interesting with the Lemba story, they say that the females, they come with them and everything, But we know when Israel fled, there was other women that also fled with them. But the Lemba story is very identical to another story we're going to talk about. But the migration of the female lineages, what's interesting is that they actually conclude when examining the women in Yemen, that the women in Yemen been up there for a long time in Yemen, and they're not you can't even call them African, because if you look at what it says, it'll say this. It'll say, just talks about basically, you see that right there, mono, right? Phali, or how you say that? Philopy, or how you, I'll keep saying that weird, but monophylactic, right? It's just talking about basically a group that's one, right? All related and everything. It just talks about everything what it's going to say here. It just says it's limited to this time frame, which is after the Paleolithic, right? So it's going to be a late time frame of ages. And it says basically what they found there was L3 lineages and M lineages and N lineages, right? They say range from 2,000 to 4,000 years ago, right? So they know that the L lineage was over there for a long time. We know that too, because when we look at the L lineage, we know that the L lineage was in Syria. It went down to Israel. And so it was over here in Yemen for a long time. So we know the L3 lineage was over there for a long time. It just talks about how these groups are basically, you see how they say they're not basically a monophylactic group, because L3, you can see even with L0, L3, M, and N are three different groups. With the female lineages, it goes M, N, and L. So these are just like the top of pretty much the three divisions, M, N, and L. So basically M, N, and L was all in the land of the Levant for a long time. So very important, very, very important. In this area, Yemen, just to make that more clear. So it's just letting us know that those lineages, the female lineage was over there. That's very important. That's very, very important. I'm going to go back over here and continue on, because this is very important. We just talked about a little bit of that information of those groups. The reason why I say that, because the women, they still have a chance that they could be from there. But notice, I'm going to show you something interesting about their song, is that they don't even know where this location is. But I'll show you where this location is. They don't know where this location is, and they didn't know where this location is. When they sang the song, they didn't know where this location is. That's very important. But it's very possible that rather they could be talking about coming from far away, from Turk, right? So that when they came over here, it could be more or less that they're more talking about this place, that they actually came from the place with the Turks, from Turkestan, right? They could be just singing about this little place right here. That they themselves will be a group of people that came from Turkestan and came down to Yemen. So they could be more talking about that they came from this area, from over there. Now I'm going to show you also what the person I was just showing you, the historian, says. Just gonna, well, I'll get to that when we get to those last pieces. But that's most likely where it comes from. But this is what the that one historian says. I'm gonna get back to what he says too in another place. He believes that it's this place, right? Now, what's interesting is he himself actually admits that he doesn't even know. He admits that he doesn't know, because I have a quote from him right here from PBS. This is what he says: in the oral history, which is really a rather ambiguous story, they don't know where Sina is. So he talks about that they don't know where Sina is. They don't know where even that place is. So what's interesting is, if you note the history, you'll note something very interesting that happens in time. So first, I'm going to show a little bit of if you don't know the Lemba story and everything, I guess for the sake of the live, I'm going to show a little bit of their story.
Whether it was a burst dam or the rise of Islam, something made the Jews abandon Senna. When they did, the only way open to them would have been to head for the coast, and for some at least, that meant catching the monsoon winds south to Africa.
Concentrated in the shadow of the Soutpansberg Mountains in the far north of South Africa. To the casual observer, they look and live much like any other traditional Southern African community. But if you scratch below the surface, there are some intriguing differences.
Here I am in South Africa, and there are these men wearing skull caps and talit, the shoulder wraps. You would see this in any synagogue in America or Israel, but I never thought I'd see it here in South Africa.
I want to find out. There, they lived as traders and craftsmen, and down over the generations can help us make a connection to the lost tribes of Israel. The Lemba story goes like this. Thousands of years ago, they were forced out of Israel and settled in a place called Senna, which is believed to be the present-day Yemen. There, they lived as traders and craftsmen until war or natural disaster pushed them across the Red Sea and into Africa. Then began a slow migration south. Along the way, according to the Lemba, they built great stone cities. It's a claim that's fascinating. Himmler is convinced that Lemba ancestors did indeed come from the Middle East.
So now, if you notice, their story is all over the place. When I say it's all over the place, sometimes I'll say they went around the continent, they went through the continent, they built some cities, but the cities aren't there. The findings of different things aren't there. They're different information. But let me show you something. So they say that a lot of times they'll say that they came from Sina. But what I'm going to show you today, that is more likely that the Sina that they're saying is more Sana. It's more the more Sena, or how you say that. Like, you can see it's a little different, but you're going to see the understanding when we go over this, because on the information, it'll tell you that, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing this word, Sina or Sina or Sena or Sana, how you say that, right? Sana, or how you say that, right? This little city, they'll say that this village is distant from the capital of Yemen, this city. They'll say that this city will be different than a city that's over here. Now, it's true. These cities will be located in a different area, but their history is tied. So we just talk about how the Lemba, right, the story of, now what's important about this, the source here is not great. The reason why, because I had this source, I had to buy it, but here's the source that is using the world famous treasures lost and found. So this source is not, It's not a great source. It's really not. It doesn't have much to it. It's modern. It doesn't have ancient history. In fact, I found out that they don't have much ancient history. The only thing they have is this genetic result that they're saying, well, that genetic result surely proves everything. But if you go and look at the history, yes, there's Israelites there, but you got to know which group is the Israelites versus the group that's going to be more of a group that left from the Turks. But now let's understand what I'm saying when I say a group that left from the Turks. What's going on here? What I'm talking about. Let's get a little more before we get into the last piece of history.
Long ago in the Holy history, not rules were never lost. Considering how accurate these customs have stayed, confidence in the rest of their oral history being well preserved and truthful increases. So what is their story? What do they believe about their Judaic origin? I'll tell you. According to the Lemba oral tradition, their ancestors were Jews of the priest caste who left Judea 2,500 years ago and settled in Yemen, creating a new city called Senna by the Indian Ocean's coastline. Eventually, conditions in Yemen changed for the worse, and a group of men decided to set sail to northeastern Africa. After arriving in Ethiopia and intermarrying with the locals, the immigrants split up, with one group staying in the area while the other group traveled further south into modern-day Tanzania and founded another city, simply titled Senna II. The original Senna had become a key part of the exiles' mythos. A constant desire to return to their home one day led to a veneration of the name abandoned for unknown.
If you notice, the story changes quite often. Notice that they said it came here, they went over here, right? They made with the women. And what's interesting about this, about the whole thing when they're illustrating this, you can notice that the story itself is quite conflicting. It's quite conflicting. This one also talks about they split, they went in different ways. Also this part where they talk about right here,
exiles' mythos. A constant desire to return to their home
just go
one day.
back a little bit to hear what he just said.
Senna, by the Indian Ocean's coastline. Eventually, conditions in Yemen changed for the worse, and a group of men decided to set sail to northeastern Africa. After arriving in Ethiopia and intermarrying with the locals, the immigrants split up, with one group staying in the area while the other group traveled further south into modern-day Tanzania and founded another city, simply titled Senna II. The original Senna had become a key part of the exiles' mythos. A constant desire to return to their home one day led to a veneration.
You'll notice that the Senna that they talk about, that city can't be found. It is not known at all, the city and everything.
Creating a new city called Senna by the Indian Ocean's coastline.
But notice, the reason why I want you to see is because notice right here, I mean to click that, but notice right here, there's a conclusion that also the Lemba came from when the Jews went through it with, apparently there's a story where they fled from Babylon. There's another story where they fled from Assyria, right? All these could be true. But the Jewish group that would be the actual Jewish group would actually be that E1B1A, not the J group. But I'm going to show you how that J got there. And I'm going to confirm to you how that J is actually a recent development. It's actually a recent development in that area. So it's very, very, very interesting. But they'll say that it's Senna, but more or less that one that they try to say is not. This is more of what they're linking to the story that happened in Senna. And there's actually a very important story that happened there with the Ottoman Turks. And that caused the people to leave there and actually move and go into a different location. And it actually aligns perfectly with the genetics. And that's what we're going to talk about. Because that little area over here, these were all conquered by the same empire. When this area was conquered, both of these areas were conquered and were owned by one empire, by the same empire. And that's what we're going to talk about real fast. So just to show a little, well, I'll come back to this little part. I'll show a little bit of that. But first, let's get a little more on that history right here. Okay, so I'm going to read this. Another Ottoman attempt to conquer Yemen occurred in the 1630s. That's important because we was just talking about a war that happened in that time, a war that a lot of people don't know about, right? In the 1630s. However, this expansion ended, right, and everything, and one of the leaders was there and everything, and he had dominance over an area. And the areas that they're gonna have dominance over, notice that he extended his dominion from how you said the Asher to Hadramat. And the area that is going to be established was mapped. It was put on a map by one of the geographers from the 1600, 1657, very early on, and he was connected with the Ottomans. This is very important that he had obviously understanding of the area, right? This is actually going to be the corner of basically the Middle East, right? The corner where you see the Arabia Felix, that's basically the Arabian Felix, right? And the connection of basically what you see right there. So it's a very detailed picture of this area. Is what you're seeing there in the corner of Africa. That's what this is. So a little picture right there with the corner right there. So that's what this is a little picture of that. I'm going to read you something here. So this is going to be from a book. I'm going to open it. It's going to be talking about that location. The reason why, because that location is a covering area. Look, I guess how to make that more, make it make sense for you. Basically, there's two places, right? Sina and these two names that sound similar, they are together in a similar territory, is what it's talking about here. These little areas here, this area and this area, they're actually in the same territory. And the territory is actually called, just go down a little bit right here. This little area here, I'm going to try to pronounce it, Hadramaut, something like that. I'm not going to try to pronounce it again. But that's this little area here in Yemen is actually an area of control. You see this little area here is an area of control. What's important about it is that this little area of control would be basically this whole area. And in fact, at the Ottoman time, this area was all connected. They were connected as in basically, whoever takes a piece of this area starts to take the whole thing, starts to basically be part of the whole thing. And basically what I mean is, let me show you. Just make it all fast so you can see the summary here. Show you right here first. So you can see they're going to work their way up. So they're going to work their way up and take these little areas here. So notice this is the Ottoman Empire. And notice they took this area here. So the Ottomans took this area. And also notice that year, 1581. 1581, the Ottomans took this area, right? Now, did they leave this area? No, it was still under its influence. It was afflicted. It was under its influence. They had a lot of upper coast Africa and everything. We'll go down over here and show you another one. So you can see here. So the Ottomans growing, right? 1500s. You can see right there. 1544, you can see they get a lot of this area here. They get a good influence on this area. The reason why is because we're going to note something with these years. Something that's going to be important about 300 years. You can see. So they're they got a big control of this area, right? They're pushing people out and everything. They have a strong power in these areas and whatnot. You see what's going on there? That's the Turkish. These are Turkish lineages. Look at that bin, how it went around Africa, right? This is the Turkish dominance. The Turks actually they came from over here, and then they went and took all these places. The Turks were very powerful. So you see how long they were there? See that those time frames, 13. See what's going on there, right? That's very important. What was going on there? That was very important. That was very, very important, right? So like I say, another Ottoman attempt, right, to take Yemen, 1630s and everything was going on there. So they was really taking it 15s, 16s. And they obviously had a copy of the map in the 17s so that they had a good idea of the area. But let me read you something from this book here. There's little ones in the background and everything. All right, so there's going to be something just talking about basically, traders, scholars, and statesmen in the Indian Ocean, 1750s to the 1960s. You can see what's going on there. Watch what it says here. Just talking about the how Ottomans had took over an area and whatnot. I'm just going to read you something that's important for the understanding of a certain part of the area. This little area had haplogroup. It says the British had already restricted travel to this little area, right? And it says as wartime is basically what's going on and everything. And what they basically did, let me actually go over here, right to that little screenshot there. So I'm showing you about this little area here and what was going on there and the little wars that was happening in these areas here, right? Because that's where supposedly the Lemba left, right? That's very important. So it lets you know that the Lemba left these areas, right? They say that they came from Sinai, right? Let's go back over here. All right, so let me just read something from this little quote. So like I was just saying, right, just talks about what happened with the Ottomans and everything. They basically, what they did was they divided the territory. They basically divided the territory amongst themselves. And they basically only allowed, one part of the area to be for the British, another part for Arabia, and another one for the Ottomans and whatnot, right? You can see where they just talk about some of the things and whatnot, making sure about the right little thing. So I just talk about that little area here. You can see this is Yemen. I know it's kind of tilted like that and everything, but it's talk about this little area of control. It shrank over time, but it was larger before. That's very important. But it had connections. It had connections with the Ottoman Empire. You can see what's going on with the Ottomans and everything. And then it'll talk about pretty much that the British had already restricted travel to the area and whatnot. So remember, the Ottomans had control of the Middle East, and then it was taken later on by the British and everything. So I just want to show that, just a little information of the Ottoman connection with that area. And go down real fast, so just get right to a little information. This one I'm not gonna play. This is like an hour long, but this talks about the wars that happened. Just a little history of the wars. So this was important to know. This is a little information about that place in Yemen, right? See that little area down there in the Arabian Peninsula, right? I'm going to read something what they say. The contemporary borders are largely a product of foreign policy goals and actions of Britain, the Ottoman Empire, and Saudi Arabia. You see what's going on there, what it's talking about there? It's connections with all these things. That's very important, right? To know their influence on these areas. Let's go down. So the reason why I was showing you that is because let me show you what they say about the genetic studies of that area, right? I'm going to show you what they say about the genetic studies of the area. I'm just going to read it right off of here. So collections were made 1997 at 2 locations, right? At that one place, right? I was talking about Hadramaut and Yemen were basically parentally unrelated, right? But otherwise randomly selected males. So they was looking at the ancient genetics in that land, but watch what it says here. The present day residents of Sina, because remember, that's where the Lemba said it came from. They said the present day residents of Sina suggests that their ancestors may have moved to the area relevantly recent, 300 years ago. So they're actually saying that the individuals that came from Sina, there were individuals that basically replaced them. And that means that was a environment or a large migration from that area, and then the new people came there, and they're only there for 300 years. That the information that they find there for the individuals there are for only 300 years. Now, notice that, remember how I said it was multiple groups, right? The Lemba, these aren't just one types of people. These are all types of people that came from Crete, a lot of them that were sold in the areas and went downwards. You don't just find A and B, or you don't find E or J only. You find K, you find L, you find O, you find P. You find different lineages, whatnot, with different groups. But let's talk about what they find in the Lemba, Remba, and Vinda. Because I'm going to show you, like I said, the individuals. Remember we talk about the Vinda right there? See that Vinda there? Just going to go up real fast. Remember, the Lemba had a story. They was going to go. And why all these genetics together? Because they all dwelled amongst each other, right? Different name doesn't make much of a difference. But let me read you something here. So remember, they have different names. The way they say their names is different. Basically, they talk about the Vinda, right? During the 12th and the 13th century, they migrated there. So the Vinda, they're not native to that area. They came there during the 12th and 13th century. That means that the Lemba, for them to dwell among them, they also had to have a migration. And that's what they talk about. They talk about the last group, which consisted with the, how you say that one and this one, Lemba, basically only made their appearance during the 17th century. So remember what we just found out, 17th century? Remember we just found out when we was talking about what was going on with the Turkish invasion and what time that happened, 1600s, right? And then that was in the area of Yemen, and then they had to leave Yemen, and the genetic results also show that the people in Yemen are there fairly recent, within the last 300 years. You see what's going on there, the connections on these things and whatnot. So the little maps right there talk about 17, 16, 15s, right? What's going on there, right? And the ones in Yemen, right? They talk about a time that they had to leave, they had to flee Yemen and everything, right? Because the war that happened there. They say that we know that in the present day residents in Sina, right, suggests that their ancestors may have moved to the area recently, 300 years ago. So you see what's going on there? So that's very important. That's very important. But notice Lemba, you'll see B there. You'll see E1B1A, large portion E1B1A. You'll see E1B1B. You'll see F. You can see some F there. You'll see some J's, of course, some K9, some L's. So you get a couple of different groups. A lot of them that we know when we look at when it came from Crete and that was sold into Africa, we know that they're going to have a mix of different individuals in there. So that's how the Lemba are actually fairly mixed. And you can see the Vinda, the group that came there in the 1300s, they don't have the Lemba with them. They wouldn't be considered as being like the Lemba, but they would be considered more your pure Israelites. 32 are E1B1A. Those would be your real Israelites, E1B1A. But they also have mix of E1B or B, E1B or B and A. So they have some other Hamitic lineages. These are real Hamites. You see this long stem here? These are the real Hamitic lineages. These are actually one family, A and B. These are one family. But these are different. These ones are different. Notice that separation there, right? You see that separation there? It's a difference. There's a difference between these lineages, right? But what's important is that your E1B1A, your Asian lineages, they're the ones that you would count as being the real Jews that went down there. But these other ones are later lineages that came down there. That these J lineages, these Turkish lineages came down there later on. That's a very important thing. That by just comparing the J, which we know is Turkish, and trying to make those Jews wouldn't make any sense on a monophylactic graph when you try to graft it to who it's related to, because I is surely European, right? So important changes was in an area 300 years ago in the land of Yemen, right? From 15 to 1900s. That's how we can see is 300 years, right? Because the information that, remember, this information that you're seeing here is talking about from May 1990, right? 1997. So 300, they say within 300 years, what's a change, right? You see what's going on there in that area? So that in that area, within 300 years was a change. So that way, that's why when you note these genetics, you also got to note migrations that happened there. And they were selling Turks, right? They were selling Turks into Africa, right? They were selling Turks into Africa. Most likely, some of them fled away, right? Would you want to flee away if you was sold as a servant, right? Africa wasn't poor, right? They wasn't strange to doing these things. So it's just a little information to those groups and whatnot. Let's see the Lemba, Vinda. They say that, right? Got some different groups just showing that real fast. Go back over here. So that's important. So in Sina, there was a relevantly recent transition of power over that area. That over the last 300 years, we know that Sina has new people there, pretty much. Suggests that their ancestors may have moved to the area relevantly recent. It's very important, right? And we know that because of Turkish invasion. The Turkish invasion took over that area. Let me show you something. What I was just showing you. Here's kind of like a little summary of what I was kind of like showing you in a way. Let me go to a better picture, a little more clear. PBS for that picture. So this is a historian, right? I was just telling you a little bit about him. He said that this is what he says about Sina, right? He just talks about how basically, you know, when they try to track them and everything with the history and everything, you know, he talks about the story is very ominous, right? It's very strange, right? Strange story. He says they don't know where Sina is what he said that those ones don't know where Sina is, right? They refer to Sina in the same way they would refer to the paradise or heaven, right? They say we'll meet again in Sina, right? See what's going on there in that area? Now let's get a little understanding. Let me pull up this little picture here. All right, so notice this Sina right here. What they end up coming to the conclusion that Sina has connections to this place right here. Let me go back over here. We'll go up. So you see that history we just went through, because a lot of the history that you just seen there was to the place of Sinna. And I'm going to show you another piece of history that I went by, I think up here, right here. I got to show you this, which I think I did. But I'm going to make sure I showed you that. Yeah, I did. So remember they went down to Africa and everything right there, right? But I want to show you this little map. So you see these two names here sound very similar. They was in the same control of the Ottomans, and the people there was being pushed out, and a lot of them were sold as slaves with the Turks, right? That's very important. So they came there, had a lot of control of that area, right over here, right? Had a lot of control in this area, right? The change was in the last 300 years, right? That area changed in the last 300 years. That's very important, right? Let us know that the area changed. But the reason why I'm showing you that, because, right, let me make sure I grab this little quote here. So remember how they said they went to Sinna right there and everything? And they say their story is that they went deep into that area and whatnot. But that's why this examination is important to examine carefully, because they say that they left from Sinna, right? And their history matches more with the history behind the secret war that happened in Sinna, right? Because that was a major war that happened in that place, and that was people that was sent out from that place when they talk about the war and everything. And they know the Ottomans had power and control over that area, and the Ottomans came in relevantly recent. The Ottomans came in relevantly recent. So the genetics are saying that, the history is showing that. And when you go more into this location and everything, and then even who all came into that location, their historical sayings, how they got into that area, we know that the movements were relevantly recent, right? The movements were relevantly recent. It is one of those things that we got to understand that, you know, when they sing this story and they say they came from this place, that doesn't mean that they're just one group of people. That means that we got to look at it more carefully and examine who they are and whatnot. So the reason why I wanted to show you that is because this little find here is highly important to know. This is an important piece of information to know about that total migration. They don't tell you about that total migration. So when you think about the Lemba, always remember they have a high connection to Sinna. Even right here, just talks about a little bit of their oral history, right? Just talks about where they came from and everything. It's no doubt that some of them came down there. There's no doubt at all, right? But it talks about the Lemba and everything. It says, moreover, some of the Lemba who live in Zimbabwe refer to here as Rimba. So it says some of the Lemba are called Rimba. Why? Their name for themselves. They named themselves Rimba, since there is no L sound in their spoken language. So when you look on there, you see the Lemba, Rimba, Zimba, all that, whatnot. The people who are coming there and naming them, they don't understand what Rimba, Zinda, and Limba means. That these are actually just a mixed group that came down there, all mixed. But the ones that were moving, the first ones that were first there was the Zinda. Zinda were the first ones, but the Rimba and the Lemba are the same. They would be the same groups, and they just naming themselves different, right? That's very important because they didn't have an L in their language. We call them Rimba, but these are the same, right? They're a mixed company. You see some J1, some J2, right? You see some K's, some L's right here. You see this mixed group, but notice that the Vinda is not mixed. They have some A and B's and some E1B1B and some obviously the large real Israelite lineage, the E1B1A, but the Lemba is that mixed company. The Lemba is that mixed company that came down there. That's very important. That the Lemba, the P, that classic, they say is the Kohan, the Kohan and whatnot. They say is that lineage. Continue to talk about that 19, that year right there, right? We already talked about that, right? We know that they went upwards, right? How can they be Aaron, right? If they became the Japhetic nation. What's important is that JP58 are found in Ashkenaz today. So it says Jews, that's Ashkenazi. We know that the JP58 is found in them. But the ones that's found in the Lemba and the Rimba, who are the same peoples, these groups are the ones that traveled from the Turks. That's very important, and were sold, and different ones were moved into different areas. That's why these two areas are connected, and then understand these languages, right? It's very important to understand. A lot of times they even call them Islamic. A lot of the practices they have, they say it's connected to Islamic. But you can see where it talks about the name refers to as Sinna or Sunna, right? Sunna or Sinna, right? Talks about the connection, where they go, right? Where they move. The genetics tell us that they themselves, right? They came from over here, from the place of the area that was all together when the Turks came there, and they left. They had to leave. And then the genetics show that within the last 300 years, there was a change of peoples there. And these people left and went downwards. Obviously, most likely mixing with races or whatever. Could have been some women with them. There's no doubt, because we see the L lineage of what's up there. We know that also some of them have the E1B1A in them. So E1B1A would be the real Israelites. But this group would be a mixed group, and the J group is Turks. So that's very important. So that's why you see that J down there, is that really in the understanding of the origin, is that if you want to connect J to what J is and his origin story, J is connected with G, and G, the G haplogroup was there very early, right? But in 9,500 is where the J group emerged, is when the J group emerged. If you want to see a little more on this, I got a little more on these things with G and all those things, whatnot. And you can see a little bit on that for those that dig deep into these things. But this right here, this is just some information with just the sum of what's needed. What's the sum of what's needed, pretty much. So I just want to tell you that the Lemba group, when people start talking about the Lemba, a lot of times they don't know the history behind the Lemba, and that the Lemba actually are connected with the ancient Turks, and that the Turks came, here's the story, the Turks came to Yemen and conquered them, and the genetics show that they replaced the people, and for 300 years, right, within that time frame when they came and took Yemen, is that they occupied the area. They even took the ancient area where they say they came from. And then that group that left here actually went down here, and they had a lot of that J group with them. A lot of them were from Crete. A lot of them were even the J group that was already from Crete, and they were sold by the Turks. They were sold by the Turks. So that's just something that's very important to understand, that you can find different lineages in different places. That doesn't necessarily make them any claim to a thing unless you look at it very carefully. Like, what I mean is, when they say that the J lineage is supposedly a high priest line, when you examine it carefully, like most people that examine the J, like the real geneticists that look at the J honestly, at the whole picture of the J is an Indo-European lineage, and that it cannot be the ancient Israelites, because it was majority of Turks. Majority of Turks. And when I say Turks, I'm not talking about Turkey. I'm talking about Turkestan. So I'm not talking about Turkey when I talk about Turks. I'm talking about Turkestan, right? I'm talking about the area where the Turks were at, right? Turkestan, right? In these different areas, right? Mongol and everything. We already talked about that and everything. Why J is, that's his homeland. Yes, he began here, went over here, spread to all these different areas, but his majority here. It's a major majority of it here. And that's why it's called Turks. That's why they call it a Turkish lineage, because that's where the Khazars also came from. The Gog Turks, G-O-K, Turk. That's where they came from. And the Ottomans, they were all related. The Ottomans, the Khazars, they were Turks. They were all related. That's why when you compare their genetics today, they match, because they were related. So that's a conundrum that a lot of people are in, that the J group replaced the original Arabs, and the J group replaced the original Israelites. So you mean a conundrum there. But ancient genetics tells their origin. That's what's important. So I just want to show that's who the Lemba are. The Lemba are a mixed group that came from the Turks, and it's important to understand how they actually got down there. They were selling, and there was all types of stuff. Selling of Turks, right? Very, very important. Deep history, very deep history. So that's just some extra that I just put there real fast. And let's continue, as we didn't finish with his review. He got some statements to say, right?
As expected.
As expected. Let me go to, now we're going to talk about the female lineage. So So this is where it's going to get kind of interesting too. I'll make sure I put a timestamp.
Priest was among them. Looking at the mitochondria, though, we get a little different picture. About half of the mitochondria of Ashkenazi women, those are Jews from Eastern Europe, belong to 3 different females that come from group K. That's a very interesting founder effect. I mean, half of Aaron, the high priest, was among them.
Looking at the mitochondria, though, we get a little different picture. About half of the mitochondria of Ashkenazi women, those are Jews from Eastern Europe, belong to 3 different females that come from group K. That's a very interesting founder effect. I mean, half of that population goes back to 3 very closely related women, but that also means that about half, a little less than half, don't belong to that group. The next most common group is group H, which is the...
All right. We're going to look at, first we're going to start with K. Let's first understand what's going on with K. What's the story with K? What's going on with that? Let me show you something that he must, I don't know why he doesn't know this, or I don't know what's going on with that. But they was trying to sell something. That was a recent study that came out. It said, this is what it said. This is what the Ashkenaz took. He probably is going off of the Ashkenazi understanding on this. Let me just show you something that's very important. There was a study that came out, and they released it on one of these, this little Jewish channel. I had an associate, well, a friend at that time. He was Ashkenazi, but speaking about the Messiah, you know how it goes. But he himself told me a lot of stuff. That's why I understand a lot of these things, because I learned a lot. But he told me that this is one of the sites that he used, this site that a lot of Jews use. It also has a Bible on it, this little thing right here. It has talked to rabbis and whatnot and all that jazz and whatnot. But what it talks about is really interesting, what it says right here. And it's about these individuals. He says, this is what it says. In a fascinating study published in 2006, right? And this is what he's talking about. He's talking about this study from 2006. It showed that 40% of all Ashkenazi Jews were descended from just 4 Jewish women who lived more than 1,000 years ago, right? That's very important. So what women is it talking about? It's talking about the K group. It's very important. But notice that they say Jewish, right? Jewish women. Is that what the result? Is that what the study said? Absolutely not. First, let me show you what the study actually said. This is what the study actually said. The study was not actually determining that the women were Jewish. Rather, the study was actually determining that the women were actually Indo-European, is what they actually found out. Let me show you something down here first. Let me just go down and show you this real fast. All right. So this is what they found in a study and everything. It's going to go up right here. This is what they say. 4 founding mothers. This is the real study. This is the real information that was said in the real study and the finding that they found and everything. And they talk about the ancestry of the individuals, but they found out something important. They said 4 founding mothers who lived in Europe 1,000 years ago were the ancestors of 2/5 of all Ashkenazi Jews, but they know that's higher now. The percentage is like up to 80, 90%. But what they found out was that they were European origin, that they found out that these individuals were of European origin. Let me show, and I'm gonna show you how we know they're European origin, because I also got a copy of one of the oldest, like when I showed you that old E in Europe, 15,000 years ago. Also, you can find different, because it was mixing with Indo-European women. For some reason, it was up there mixing. But notice right here, you can see, I'm gonna go down and show you this right here. So here's a little bit from that study. So you can see, you'll see Y chromosome G groups, G and H, G and F. G and F were very early. This is in Europe. Notice that you'll see Indo-European lineages, Ks and Us and U's and H's, right? K is from U. Let me go over here and show you something. It says, this is what it says right here. I'm going to show you a couple of different pieces of information that they found out in some studies. This is very important. So I don't know how he doesn't know this, but let me just show you what is actually said about these studies real fast. Okay, so they had brought out a study, 2013, and they talk about modern Jews originating in Italy and everything. Let me just go up here and just talk a little bit about it. Pretty much what they end up concluding. Just gonna close this. I don't know what's going on over here. You reach your free 5. I don't know why I've never seen that free 5. Many are realizing it's very important. I'm gonna show you. I'm just gonna show you that. That's why I always screenshot. All right. This is what they say. If being Jewish is defined as basically genetically descending from Israelites through the female or the mother's line, then many Ashkenazi Jews fail the test according to this data. That's what they said. They said many Jews realize they fail the test. Richard acknowledges that the work is likely controversial. That's why when we go over this stuff, a lot of times people get offended because it's controversial, but it's the truth, right? One way to reconcile his teams will not, I'm going to skip down to show you the actual study right here. All right, so watch what it says here. Just talks about the results and everything on the study. It just talks about what they had and everything. Watch what they say here. 4 major founder lineages within K and N, right? Because N is K comes from N, whatnot. So, and U, right? N makes U, and then U8 is where K comes from. So it even says right here, haplogroup K arose within haplogroup U8. It says 36,000 years ago in Europe or Near East. Within the major clade, you can just see right here, most of these are rising in Europe, right? Within the last glacier period in the Neolithic. That's very important, right? Let's go down a little bit. So that's reason why that's important is because this information most people know about already. So it's something that not a lot of people get into after they know this. But overall, it seemed that at least, right? This is another study, right? When it's talking about the Indo-European that was mixed in. You've probably seen this when you look up Ashkenazi genetics and then you go to the female lineage and you'll see a circle and you'll see like 81% of European. It says overall, it seemed that at least 80% of Ashkenazi female and maternal ancestry is due to the assimilation of mtDNAs indigenous, right? Basically native to Europe, most likely through conversion. Now, most likely through conversion, most likely they're all converts. That's actually very important because when we look at the whole picture, that's what we see is a mix. If the females aren't who they are and the males, that's too many males there, that's going to be very suspicious to what we're seeing there, right? Obviously looking at the tree and everything, when they're pairing the male lineage, they obviously see that many of them basically assimilated in Western Europe, right? You talk about the female lineages are from Western Europe. Now, let me show you something from one of our synthetic Sundays that we went over.
But the female line is very important to understand. That's already been verified that is a European line. 100%. We already went over that a few times, but I'll show it just for the sake of the live. Let's look at this real fast. Watch what he does here. Watch what he basically breaks down here. Not this. Let me go down a little bit. I want to show you this summary. Down a little bit. All right, 1225. So I'm going to show you this. This is a summary of this is why we're not looking at the female line, which is that not the Y chromosome, but a different line.
Judaism, after all, maintains...
This is going to be from Dr. John Entine, right? Talk about race identities and the DNA of the chosen people, all right? Watch what he says at 1225. Watch what he says here. This is why we're not going to look at the female line.
It was formed. As for the female DNA, this is interesting. I have a startling statement to make, which may be that none of you here who are Ashkenazi Jews may be under the laws of Israel Jewish. That is true by DNA, and this is going to present some fascinating theological problems. The reality of it is that most of female DNA that they've done testing of traces back to European populations. Whether they were pagan or Christian, it's not clear, but they almost certainly were not Semitic. There is a sizable percentage of wandered
information on their own genetics per se. Who you see now is China and everything.
If you've never seen this little video, this goes over, you don't have to go over anything else once you just go over this video. It's all the Y chromosomes. And I seen this video before I even seen Dr. Nathan Jeanson's video on that the J group was Turks, because I examined the J group thoroughly and I noticed that it was blending with the J groups of other Indo-European Turks and other groups, especially in the Caucasus Mountain. And that's very important because the Caucasus Mountain, the people who settled here are people from over here. The people who settled here are not the original people over here, but they're people who came from this way. That's very important. That's very, very important. Like when you think Khazars, a lot of people, when they think Khazars, they thought they just arose here, but they really are from here. The migration of them is from the Gok Turks. That's very important.
Dark skinned people out here and Japanese.
All right, so let's get back to this. So now he's going to go to H. Now, what's interesting, like I was just showing you, the H group was there with the Indo-Europeans. It's an Indo-European lineage too. It's one of those things that even he admits that the lineage that he has is that same lineage. It's a lineage that many Indo-Europeans have. It's no hidden secret to it. But we also know that ancient Indo-Europeans had it, right? 16,000 years ago in Europe. You can see right here, your H is going to be up there, multiple different H's and your K's and U's and things like that. And that's going to be a classic Indo-European lineage. That's okay. Just the truth, right? So we see classic Indo-European lineages in ancient Europe. Now we also can go to different places in Europe and find that it was up there for a long time. Like for example, in this place right here next to the Rhine River, right? I don't know how you say that. I don't know. I'm not going to try to pronounce it. I said it once, but I keep getting the word twisted. But it's by the Rhine River. They found certain genetics by the Rhine River. You can see it right here. Right? This is the location here. But they did find some very interesting genetics here, which would be right here in Europe, right there. So at the Rhine River, right? It's like a classic place where a lot of people are at. But you can see right here, they talk about the mtDNA and the female, the mtDNA is the female DNA and the Y DNA. But the mtDNA, you see H, right? At the Rhine River, ancient times, T, U, J, mtDNA, and then obviously your R and I in the European lineages. So you can see what's going on there. That's very important. So just let us know what's going on there. So that was in ancient time in that area in this little cave right here. So just a little bit of that place. So right here, just talks about this cave. It says about 3,000 years ago, right? They say they found them in the Rhine River. So that's why it's called, this is why these lineages are ancient Indo-European. Something that's always been up there for a long time. That's why they call it ancient Indo-European. That's why they call it that. But this lineage also mixed with the Natufian. So that's very important. So a lot of lineages, almost every lineage mixed with the Natufian, almost pretty much. L, M, and N. They mix with the Natufians. But that's important to know that they got that from someone else, right? It talks about that they were mixing with Neanderthals and everything, and they were getting female lineages and everything. I talked about that before when they was accidentally saying C was Neanderthals and stuff like that. Now, back over here, now I'm going to close some of this stuff so it don't get too complex. So just that little information on the Lemba, Binda, and Rimba, that real name of them and everything. So right here, continuing on.
Most common mitochondria in Europe. I have H16, so I'm a typical European male because of my Y chromosome and my mitochondria. But a lot of Ashkenazi Jews also belong to group H. So does that mean that they're European? Not necessarily, because just like the Y chromosomes, the mitochondrial lines, they branch very early in the tree.
This was one of the most silliest genetics statements I heard in a long time. Now, if anyone understands the tree, you know that H is a H. So you got to understand, if an H is found, if the ancient H is found in the upper area, everything else is going to come from it. That's just important. It's kind of like someone having a J group and they're saying J1 and J2 are not related. J1 and J2 are going to be different people in the sense of Ham, Shem, and Japheth. Like they're trying to say J2 would be European and J1 would be Shem. Like someone saying something like that would be ridiculous. That'd be absolutely ridiculous because they would be exactly the same. They'd be brothers. They not just brothers, but they come from the same father, let alone being monophylactic. You know what I'm saying? That's just an important thing to understand. Like, for example, all J's are J, right? All J's are J, right? If we go to a female lineage, anyone who's H will be H, but there's lineages under H, like V's and stuff like that for the female lineages. But to have an H means that they have an H, right? Even if it's a different SNP doesn't make it a different H. It just makes it a different lineage from the H. That's all that it means. But they're all going to be from the ancient of what they are, that they're Indo-European. Even he says he's Indo-European. Most Indo-Europeans have that lineage, right? Which, why would that make it any difference if many people have that same lineage who are Indo-European? And then the Ashkenazi Jews who say that their women will be the select women from Sarah, right? Sarah, Rebecca, right? Rachel, Leah, all the different individuals and everything. But what do we see? What do we see? We see that many people have that lineage, right? Even he talks about it. So does it make them European based upon the scientific means? Yes, it does, because that's where they were located for a long time, right?
Yes, these things are found in Europe, but the ones found in Europe are newer than the ones typically found amongst the Jewish people.
That's not true. So when he makes the statement that the H group, the ones that the Ashkenazi have is newer, is extremely false. It's extremely false because we know that if we look at even information genetics, we know that the H, right, even all the H's are found in Europe. Every subclad of H, we could talk about every piece. We could talk about which one's the one that you would say is the H of the people who you would say would be Ashkenazi. We can find all the H's, H1, H2, H5, we can find them all up there. We can find all the lineages up there from the breaks and even to the root of it, even to the original root of it. So that's just very important to understand that it's just an Indo-European lineage.
So it doesn't look like they are European, it looks like they're Middle Eastern. Specifically, if you consider the Y chromosomes, the Y chromosome branches are associated with the Middle East. It really does look like they're Middle.
So you see how he constantly is saying Middle East, and he says even the Y chromosomes are Middle Eastern. But that's the thing about genetics. You got to actually, if you're going to make a claim, you got to make sure you have every last piece of information to make that claim. Otherwise, you'll be back checked and seen if you are actually saying the truth. What lineage is he talking about? Is he talking about the J lineage? Is the lineage from the Middle East? Well, if you look at the J lineage, it never got to the Middle East into the Bronze Age. Throughout almost all of his life, which, remember, on Dr. Nathan Jesus' illustration, remember, he illustrates that in the 18 BC that I and J were one. And he also illustrates that in that time frame, the J group would be considered Indo-European, a lineage that went upwards, that would be an Indo-European lineage. Also, what's important about that is that the J group itself, right, when selected as being the Kohanic lineage, you have to make it monophylactic. So if you say that this is Jews, the Shemites have to be right next door. They have to. So you can't just pick a J as Jews. You have to make HIJK a Shemite. You see what I'm saying? That means this has to be Shem making a Shemite, and these have to be Shemites. But I is not a Shemite because I is an ancient European Cheddar man. If you ever looked up Cheddar man or Chatter man? I always spell his name wrong. I probably spelled it wrong now. Cheddar man. There we go. Cheddar man, right? Who is Cheddar man? Now he looks dark, right? But he's Indo-European. He has blue eyes. He has a female lineage of U5, and he has a male lineage of I, which is a brother lineage of the lineage of J. And he was found, a skeleton was found in the Mesolithic time frame, 9,000 9,000 years ago in Britain. He would be considered the oldest Englishman that you can find. He'd be an old man from England. That's what he would be. And that's just very important to understand that I and J, right, they were ancient Indo-European lineages that were up there. So this would be like your first, they even say your first modern Briton, right? Lived around 7,000 years ago. That's very, very important. That's very important. All right, let me close that. So obviously IJ was 1. So if IJ was 1, and then also Dr. Nathan Jeanson basically concludes that I and J was Japhetic. So what father lineage is he trying to make Middle Eastern, right? That's very important. So obviously know if you want to make a group monophylactic, right, you got to go to his father lineage. So that means if we even consider that the G is a large portion of the Ashkenaz, if we make G monophylactic, that ends it right there. G, H, I, J, K are one family. So we got to figure out who is G, and those are one family. And that way we would know who is I, because these are all one family, right? G, H, I, J, K makes I, J, K, right? Which makes I, J, and K, which T comes from K. So that's very important. That's very, very important. They're all related from F, all related from F. So is FM89 Shemites? No. But let's continue. Let's continue.
Middle Eastern people. Also, when you look at the different Jewish groups, they're more similar to each other, spread across the entire range of where they live, than those groups are to the people amongst whom they live. Now,
see, now this is why I'm doing this review, because he shotguns all types of incorrect statements. Now I already showed it before, but if you've seen the Turkish haplogroups and any of the said people that will be settled in the land of the Levant now, because remember the Turks are the ones that settled in the Levant. So if he's talking about people who's near him, he's talking about Turks. And you know what they say about Turks and the Ashkenaz? Because he's saying they're not genetically close to them. But what's interesting about that statement is that that's extremely false. That's extremely false. The reason why is because we got multiple, and when I say multiple, I mean multiple statements of who they're related to, who they're more similar to, who they're related to, and everything. Let me just read you one, what it says right here. So here's one. Let me just go down. So here's one from a medical site right here. So a genetic site right here, just talking about the Y chromosome pool of Jews as part of the genetic landscape of the Middle East. This is what they conclude on there. This is what they say. In comparison with data available from other relevant populations in the region, Jews were found to be more closely related to groups in the north of the Fertile Crescent, right? Kurds, Turks, and Armenians, then to their Arab neighbors. That's very important. They're saying they're related to Kurds, Turks, and Armenians, then to their Arab neighbors, because a lot of the Arabs had E1B1B. That's very important that they know that many of the Arabs actually had E1B1B. Excuse me. They had E1B1B, and that's very important, right? So let's get another piece where they talk about the same thing. We say, in comparison with data available from other relevant populations in the region, Jews were found to be more closely related to, right, groups in the north of the Fertile Crescent, Kurds, Turks, Armenians, right? And I already talked about that, how they're 100% related to Armenians and everything, how their Y chromosome the same. Watch what it says this. It says, of the Jewish populations in this cluster, the Ashkenazim were closest to South European populations, specifically the Greeks and also the Turks. So they were related to South European populations, right? They were closest to South European populations. That's very important, right? We can even compare them with Turks. If we look at the Turks and the genetic of the Turks, they have exactly the same female lineages. They have exactly the same thing. That's why I made this picture, that I put the Jews on there and show that they are related to Turks on all the same Y chromosomes. They have all the same Y chromosomes, right? They have all the same ones. So that's just important to understand that that's what you're seeing there, that they are highly related to Europeans. This is what we see, right? So let's continue.
Now, clearly, there have been interbreeding events. I mean, the Jews of Ethiopia, they have dark skin. Most of them have moved to Israel now, and they've been accepted in Israel as Jewish people because they were practicing Jews. The genetics really doesn't reflect Middle East so much, but it might be because after so many generations, the Middle Eastern genes got diluted in the population and possibly lost. Or it might be that they're a bunch of converts. Oh, interestingly, there is a very controversial claim that the Ashkenazi Jews came from a mass conversion to Judaism within the Khazar Empire.
The Khazars were a Turkic group living in West Central Asia, like north of the Black Sea in the steppes, in the grasslands.
Okay, so now he says the saying, right? Many people know this, that the Jews were known to be converts. Remember I showed you that little picture where it said the Ashkenazim? We're talking about Ashkenazim on there, right? Talk about certain individuals when they said they were close to the Greeks and the Turks, right? It says the Ashkenazim. Why they call them Ashkenazim? The Ashkenazim were closest to the South European populations, specifically Greeks and Turks, right? You see what's going on there? This from a real medical site, right? You see what's going on there, right? Just let them know what's connected and everything, right? Just let us know which ones are connected, right? The Greeks and the Turks. The reason why that's important because I want to show you something about that word Ashkenazim and what he's going to say here. Let me show you something. Go down here. So a classic quote. Let me show you something. So many of the Ashkenazim had settled in Germany. Well, I have a historical quote from 1706, and it talks about that same group which filled that area. It says this, so that it may be said that Asia was the cradle of the human race and their original country, and is from thence those swarms came which filled Germany, right? Barbarian invasion and everything and whatnot, swarms came, and the other western and northern countries. And here you must know that the Hebrews, at least the modern Jews, believe that the Germans owe their origin to him who in scripture is called Ashkenaz, who was the son of Gomer and coincidentally the grandson of Japheth. And hence it is when they speak of the Teutons or the Germans, they call them Ashkenazim in their language. That's Ashkenazim in their language, as supposing them to be basically, descendants or possibly of Ashkenaz, right? You see what's going on there? So Ashkenazim was more used for the Germans, Indo-European people, and they themselves were highly mixed too and related. They was like a group of invasion. But notice that they were called Ashkenazim. That's what also they still use that term today for the Ashkenazi. That Ashkenazim were closest related to South European population, specifically the Greeks and also the Turks. You see what's going on there? That's why it talks about the Lemba were located roughly halfway between the sub-Saharan Africa and Jewish clusters. So let you know the Lemba is in between of the, say, sub-Saharan. But remember, no one started in Africa. We know that everyone migrated to Africa. So this is actually the Eurasians, the ones that migrated to Africa. As it says, he called Egypt out of Africa. You see what's going on there? Very important, right? Now, what's important here is that we see that this is an honest comparison, right? This is just this is different pieces of information that's comparing them, right? That's just important. But let's continue. Let's continue.
And so the claim for a lot of people is that, oh, the Jews are just these people. And there's one genetic claim where they looked at a whole bunch of different peoples and they said, okay, look, these Jewish people, the Ashkenazis, they do look like our test population. The test population they chose was from the Republic of Georgia, south of the Caucasus Mountains. The Khazar, they lived north of the Caucasus Mountains, and the Caucasus are gigantic.
He actually makes a historical claim here that's actually wrong. He says that the Khazars are only north of the Caucasus Mountain. The Khazars spilled all over Georgia. They actually was reached all the way down to Pontus, right? So when you see the Khazars right here, remember the Khazars was a group that was there because of the river. They were named off of the river, but these were originally Gog Turks, but they were named off the river, the Khazar River, pretty much. Well, not. But they themselves, right, are a people that actually became the Armenians. They actually, when I say Armenians, they merged with the groups that were here. They merged with the Armenians because they were all related. The Pontus, they were all related. All of them were related, right? There's no one new under the sun. Everyone's from Ham, Shem, or Japheth. So there's like a bunch of Japhethites that came together. You see what I'm saying? And not just Japhethites, but an E1B1B group that was with them too, right? And when I say E1B1B, it was an early E that mixed with the Indo-European females that became one with the groups that you will see over here. So they came, remember, they came from Gog Turks and everything. That's very important to know about the area over here. So this place was invaded. That's important. That's why people examine this area, that the Caucasus Mountain would be a great example of where the Khazars were because of the major invasion that happened there.
Gigantic geographic barrier.
But because the statistics indicated that the Jews are more similar to the Georgian population, they claim, look at that as evidence that the Khazar theory really is true. Only it's not.
Okay, so he says the Khazar theory isn't true. I showed this before, but geneticists already confirmed that the Khazar theory is the truth, that the genetics of the Khazars is found with the Ashkenaz, that the Ashkenaz end up mixing and mingling with them, because we know that they are 100% Armenian, as it says. In fact, there is no major Y chromosome haplogroup found among the Ashkenazi Jews that is not also found among the Armenians and vice versa. That means the Armenians and Khazars are one, well, Armenians and the Ashkenaz are the same. And if you look up Armenia in the Jewish library, Armenia is actually one of the words for the Amaleks, but it was a name for basically Khazaria, right? It covered areas of Khazaria and stuff like that. That's very important that they had mixed. And they were a lot of them were Hurrians, right? They were ancient Hurrians. But let me show you something on something here. Let me just go up here to it right there. All right. In fact, let me make sure this is it. Let me show you something that's said about the Khazars. Not this. Let me show you something that's said about the Khazars, because it's a confirmed study that was made. I'm just gonna let you see it real fast. As I showed this is something that is in one of the videos that I went over, but I'll just show what this individual says right here. So that's why they were studying the ones in Khazaria, in the place that Khazars settled, because we can see the genetics of these individuals and whatnot. But this is what he concluded. It's a great conclusion.
It's various countries of Eastern Europe as place of origin. And all of these people are of Ashkenazi Jewish ancestry. In all likelihood, the connection between them and the I2C from the Caucasus must have taken place through the Khazars. It would be difficult to conceive of another possibilities. The relation of Khazar origin, they are patriots and not, would confirm that the tradition of the Tagaur aristocracy was not fiction, but it was they indeed have something Armenian and patriotic on top of that. And also the links between Ossetians and Khazars. I mean, Ossetia, the Alania was included as part of was vassal of the Khazar kingdom. And we have been able to establish that at least some Ashkenazi Jews are indeed of Khazar origin, because there is this discussion that are Ashkenazi Jews Khazars, or are they from the Jews which came from the Middle East? I cannot answer the question for all of them, but at least here at this micro level, we can see that some of them at least are of Khazar ancestry, because I cannot see how it could have been otherwise.
So it's a controversial thing that, when you examine it closely, is no doubt that the claim that the Jews are not any connection to Khazars is a lie. Genetically, they do have connections to Khazars. It's a fact. They're connected by history, and they're connected by multiple things. On our Synthetic Sunday, our first five videos, that's all we talk about. The first video I ever do, I'm doing nothing but, I don't even touch the genetics. I talk all about the history, on how the history is perfectly aligned. Because Genetics just confirm what's there. That's all that it is. So are the Jews part of the Khazars? Do they have connection with Khazars? Yeah, but there's worse things they could be. But they do have connection with Khazars.
Because if you look at the Georgian population today, they're more similar to the Middle Eastern peoples than they are to Asian peoples. Therefore, in that,
just for the understanding, the ones in the area of that area today have no doubt that they are the ones that settled from the Khazars, from the Gog Turks. They're the ones that came over here and settled over here. So that statement is very odd for him to even make that statement. But it's no doubt that the people from over here came over here and settled over here. That's very important. And that's also what Dr. Nathan Jeanson was talking about, and many other geneticists. They know this because also historical documents contest to it. So these ones are not more related to the ones that were originally in the Middle East, but rather these ones will actually be all the same people, different lineages of Japheth that spread out through all the nations. That's very important. But we ourselves got to understand that which line is the Middle Eastern line. It's the E, the D and E group. Those are the ones that were the Middle Eastern line. But we can find other lineages up there like R's and J's and different things like that. But the original Middle Eastern group was the E group. That's very important. That's what we were talking about with other things in connection. But let's keep on going. Let's keep on going.
At test, they chose the wrong population. Of course, that population is more similar to Jewish people because Jewish people are more similar to Middle Easterners, just like the Georgians. The Khazar Empire is gone. These people have migrated, they died, they interbred with other people. There's no way you can actually genetically pin it to that group because those people aren't there anymore. And this paper chose the wrong test population.
Oh, it's called looking at ancient genetics. That's what the people was doing. They were looking at ancient genetics, not modern people. Is looking at ancient genetics. When they were studying the Armenians, they were studying the ancient Armenians and the ones that came in during the Khazar Empire. And they know that they are the Khazars. Then they have this, and they keep the same genetics. So that's very important. So he's basically trying to make a conclusion saying, well, you can't find them now. That was the conclusion of a lot of them, but that's why we have ancient genetics. So they are Khazars. They are related to Khazars, a lot of them.
There's no evidence that Jewish people, the Ashkenazis at least, came from the Khazars. There's none. Maybe some of the Khazars did convert, maybe, but genetically, the Jewish people really do trace back to the Middle East. And why would?
So this is why we're doing this, because he's speaking without any sources. But you know what his sources is? The world to accept his sources. But if you look at what Dr. Nathan Jeanson did on this little video, on a couple of different his videos, on the Answers in Genesis page right here, his little playlist that they have on the history of the genetics of the people, he gets really deep into the understanding on what's going on, and that it's important to examine the things unbiasedly, that sometimes controversy is just truth. That's just truth. So that's what he was doing there. Him and other geneticists found out that the J in many Jews are connected to Indo-European and also Khazars, the Turks, different Turks, Gog Turks, and things like that. That's very important. Let's proceed, though.
Would we think otherwise? The Bible is clear where they came from. We have the history of these people. We have history after the fact, during the intertestamental period, during the Roman times. They followed the trade routes for the Phoenician Empire, and later on during the European colonial times. We know where they came from. It's not a big mystery. You know, I always have trouble wrapping up these episodes. I never know how to conclude because I just like to talk and ramble. And when I get to the end, I'm like, what was I going to say for the end? So let's just say it this way. The Jewish people, we know where they came from. We know
where they came from. We know exactly where they came from because the genetics, if the people are going to go by the truth, then the information is going to tell you who they are, where they came from, and what did they mix with, and who they exactly are. We can even talk about their skull shape and talk about how they have Hittite skulls. They have Hittite skulls. They had all types of different things like that. But when you want to note these connections, like Lemba, different things like that went into these areas and whatnot, always know a little bit of the history, right? So this is going to be a video to reflect back on. If you know anyone that knows anything about the Lemba, make sure y'all willing, show them this little piece, as I think it's a little piece of history that, is not really talked about a lot, but genetics and history confirms it. Genetics and history backs it up. But let me show you something. So when I say that the Khazars were Gog Turks, right? this little note right here, this whole note is, you see how long it is? That's how complex their history is. You can find out that, yeah, we can keep up with their history because we know that the different individuals replaced the people. Like, for example, the Khazars became rulers with the Romans. The Khazars, they became rulers with the Romans. An emperor became a ruler with a Roman. And guess what they mixed by? The women. They mixed by the women. You can look it up. Leo the fourth of the Khazars. Why is it always that they're mixing with the women, right? To link themselves together. That was something they was doing a long time ago, the Hittites. They were giving their women and mixing. They were doing that with the Egyptians. They did it with everyone. Almost every nation that was at that time. They had super nations that they became one together, right? The Khazars, right? Deep history that is important to know that they didn't just pop up out of nowhere. They came from far away. Came from the Turkestan. From Turkestan to Turk. That's why the land of Turkey, it was first called Anatolia, but now it's called Turkey from the Turks. That's why it's called Turkey. It's called Turkey. It wasn't called Turkey a long time ago, but it's called Turkey now because the Turks, right? So that's why the Ashkenazim, they're related to the Khazars, but you get companies like 23andMe that's going to hide that truth, that information. So you're not going to see it in one of those things. You're not going to see it in media, but you'll find it in the background with geneticists talking about. They'll be talking about it all the time. Because it's no doubt the genetics, you can't hide something that major. You can't hide the blood. The life is in the blood. So this is just some information on some different things and whatnot. Go back up here. All right, let's see what else he has to conclude there.
Where they came from historically, biblically, and genetically. They are a Middle Eastern people group, as expected. They have a lot of genes from the Middle East, as expected. They're not one single group because we know that they interbred with others. We also know that as they spread out, they did intermingle with the people amongst whom they lived, but not to the point where they lost their Middle Eastern roots. Hey,
they lost their Middle Eastern roots. They didn't have it. They didn't have it in the first place. Now, I'm going to make sure these little things right here, if there was something here. So let me just make sure we get a good understanding on this. Let's just get a good understanding on this. Without a doubt, if you look at the information, even this live today, I just showed something that I end up losing, but I found the E group was up in the upper area for a long time. The E group origin is in the north. It doesn't start in the south. It starts in the north. It's very important. But we constantly go over why do we go over J? Because it's constantly talked about. Many people are saying J is the Jews, but that's the thing about when you examine these things. You'll find truth without a doubt. You'll find truth. But you got to sometimes have discernment. You got to have discernment because, as I showed you, Dr. Nathan Jeanson says that the J group are Japhetic. He doesn't even say just European. He doesn't just say Indo-European. He, in a video, he word for word lets us know that the J group are Japhenites. That's what he lets us know, that the J group are Japhenites. And that's important because that's part of one family, right? He basically lets us know the green, he lets us know that, remember how I showed you they were related to Greeks? Because they are Greeks. The J group is related to ancient Greeks. Ancient Greeks long ago were J. Neolithic Greeks were J. And that's why you see Turks all the way in Turkestan that settled in the Middle East, the Turks. And I have a video on E1B1B where I talk about how the Turks took the land from the original Arabs, from the E1B1B. And the Turks end up settling this area. And they pushed the Lemba out. And also remember the Lemba, they were also related to them because that's who was in Crete. Many of the people in Crete also had the same lineages. A lot of them had J. But these ones were taken. And remember, there was L3 lineages still up here and stuff like that. And so they could have easily gotten dark and got over here if they were still mixing with that group. But what's important to understand is that that group that was there in with the land of SENA or SANA, Sina, that area was invaded by Turks, and the people there had to leave. They went downwards, and many of the people were sold. We think Turks were selling actual Turks. Turks were selling people that they had got. Turks were selling people that they would claim as Turks that were Turks that they got from these islands and whatnot, and they were selling them at Egypt, and they were selling Turks, and that's who the Africans were buying. They were buying Turks, and the Turks were going downwards, and that's why you see J's and L's and different lineages down in these deeper areas, right? That's very important. That's a very, very, very important piece of history. Very, very important piece of history that we don't hear nothing about that. Can you imagine that? A Turkish slave trade? Never heard that? Egypt, right? Going down to Africa, Turks being sold into Africa, going deeper into Africa, right? Becoming servants of the Africans. The Africans weren't weak, or they weren't what's the word I'm looking for? They talk about Africans were just wild running around and stuff, but they were buying Turks. You know, that's one of those things that's really deep. But going down real fast right here, just making sure this is what this is. These little notes had closed. I'm just gonna make sure they're open so that make sure we went over everything. But that's what I wanted to go over. The statement that I want to make is that don't trust every geneticist. They may have a good intentions at first. They may want to support the Jews and everything, but they themselves are actually supporting lies, because a lot of times when they support the world's doctrine, right? The world is full of evil. As the scripture says, you think the scripture is lying when it said the whole world is covered in evil and wickedness? Why would they have truth? Why would the world have truth? We ourselves got to find the truth, and we have to bring it out. That's what we have to do. We have to hold on to these things, hold fast to it, right? That's what we got to do, right? So I'll put these notes in the description. I think this is just the copy of that same note. Yeah. I'll put these notes in the description of what we just went over.
You be blessed and you have an awesome day. It's starting to rip hard.
He don't say nothing else. That's what he talked about. So that's the correction to what he was saying. Just to show a little review on it. Was he telling the truth? Was his geneticist telling the truth? Did he agree with Dr. Nathan Jeanson when Dr. Nathan Jeanson found out that INJ was Indo-European? No, he didn't look at Jeanson's work. So obviously these geneticists are not agreeing completely. So we ourselves have to stay in the truth and examine these things very closely, very closely. So with that, family, that's all I got for now. I'm just gonna I didn't mean to close that. I'm gonna have to put that back on here. But that's all I got for now. The things that I wanted to show you is pretty much all these little things, and you'll see them in the description and these notes. We just close some of these as we go. Very important video to see. I'll keep that there. And this, just making sure. If any questions, let me know, family. Let me know. Yep, that's right. That's right. Now you know why that J went into the Lemba. So let me quickly summarize what we just did today. Let me just summarize what we just did today. And let me open up this little note because I actually need this. Technically, I need this other one for the explanation of that summary of what we did today. All right, so what did we just find out genetically today? And what did we just find out, right? Well, what is something we probably already knew and probably got a little more to, or different things like that? This is what we found out today. Geneticists don't agree. A lot of geneticists don't agree, but the facts agree. The facts agree. Don't let no one talk to you without sources. Don't let no one talk to you without sources, and examine those sources. That's very important. If you don't know what they're bringing out, I'm your brother. I'm here for you. If you have any conversations, I'm here to help you. Or any of the brothers, like Will, son of Yah. He's great with history and stuff like that. And other brothers, right? Like New Exodus and different things like that. Different brothers are digging deep into these things. But you must understand this. Let me start with this thing. When we think about the Lemba, I'm going to start with the Lemba. When you think about the Lemba, know that there is history that the people of the Turks, they end up merging with people from Crete. When they merged with people from Crete, the Cretes had all types of different lineages. One of the major lineages that they had pretty much J's, all types of different J's they had and everything. They had R's and all types of different lineages, but they had J's with them. But the Turks had J's as well. The J lineage, if you follow the trail of it, that it actually started as a Indo-European lineage. It started in Anatolia and it worked its way upwards into the Caucasus. It's just a very important thing. They also talk about how it has connection to the Indo-European languages and things like that. Just talks about how it's connected linguistically, genetically, basically biblically when it comes down to it. And then you got to also note that they was in a real location, a real place and everything. HIJK were one. HIJK was one person. That's very important. That makes IJK. So HIJK was one person. That makes IJK. Another important information is that there was a war, right? We talked about a war that happened in Yemen, right? This was that war with the Ottomans and everything. Not a lot of people knew about this. Why is this war important? Because the genetic information matches this war that happened in Yemen, right? Where it talks about pretty much right here. You can see in a remote area and whatnot, it talks about 5,000 people died and everything. And he talks about it was it's a story spanning at least 15,000 years and everything. So it's got a long time. But the recent developments of this war is recorded. We'll talk about it as we go, right? In summary, right, it was at the Arabian Felix and everything. They had a lot of battles at that little area, right? A lot of places they were battling at. But you know what they say, right? When they're talking about that little area, they know that there was a lot of bad things that happened, pretty much, long story short. And the main thing is pretty much the Yemenis or the Yemeni people were fighting against the Ottomans, right? 1635, right? They were fighting against the Ottomans, right? That's very important. They had set up their little area, but they were fighting with the Ottomans. And what we know from the Ottomans is that in the 1500s, right, they were fighting in not just Yemen, but they were also fighting in the area of Ethiopia. So that's very important. We also know that they were selling, right? They were selling Africans. Let's play that part again because that's pretty deep. Let's play that part again.
The Ottoman Empire is one of the most popular empires.
I'm actually going to play because apparently I
century, which
I wanted to play this to 3. So forgive me. I'm going to let this play real fast. I'm going to let you see this little part. 1:15 to 3, or I'll just have this in the description if you want to see the whole thing. It's really deep, but I'll just let you hear this part right here that's talked about how they were selling them down there. Right, really interesting.
Because of this, many of the Malayan rulers would take the Hajj to Mecca, and on the way they would stop in Egypt. Upon their visit in Mamluk Egypt, many of the Malayan rulers would purchase slaves, and apparently Turkish slaves were among them, according to the Syrian scholar Al-Umari. Al-Umari's work is considered by many scholars to be a major source of the Mali Empire in the 14th century. He collected his information from Egyptian officials who had met the great Mansa Musa himself. This is what Al-Umari tells us. The king of this realm sits in his palace.
I'm just going to summarize what was just said there. So that's the history of that. The Turks were being sold at Egypt, and a lot of the Turks were being sold. And it talks about 50 slaves, right, was standing by basically one of the kings of Africa. And what's interesting is that even at that time, people knew about Mansa Musa, which about 1400s, 15 earlier in that time. That's when Africa was really big, actually really famous, and a lot of powerful people were down there, Africans. But they were buying Turks, as you can see right here behind him, Turks and others who he bought from Egypt. So you see this leader is written about that this African leader had Turks. He owned Turks that he bought from Egypt. So they were selling Turks in Egypt. That's very important. So when you think about that area in the Horn of Africa and they say they went downwards, well, that J's was Turks. They was being sold. And the time frame is fitting. The time frame is fitting as well, because that time frame is going to be 1516s. And continuing on. So we already seen it's important to remember this. There's 3 different groups. Lemba, but remember, Lemba, the word L, the Lemba word in their language, Lemba, they don't call themselves Lemba, they call themselves Rimba, right? But there's another group called Vinda. These are a different group. They got there first. The Vinda group got there 12th and 13th century. Their story is that they got there in the 12th and 13th century and established their home, right? That's well known and well documented. It's also known that the Lemba, if you look at their story, they have multiple different edges to their story, but the real understanding for their story is that supposedly they come from Sina, right? But Sina has a very important history, right? The Turks took over these areas and they owned those areas, and they basically pushed the people out of those areas. Long story short, we already know that in the land of, let me just go down, these are just extra little things. When we talk about the Lemba and everything, their migration and everything, and the land of the Lemba, they themselves were pushed out of the area of Yemen when the Ottomans came down there about the 1500s. Why is that important? Because the genetics matches that same understanding that area, remember the area that they left, right? Sina, that area after the 1600s, was replaced with a new inhabitants. A new inhabitants came there, which come down here real fast. It talks about right here. It says the present day residents of Sinna suggest that their ancestry may have moved to the area relevantly recent, 300 years ago. That's very important. So when you think about the Lemba and the Rimba, remember this when you look at that when it talks about, moreover, some of the Lemba who live in Zimbabwe referred to here as Rimba. Lemba, Rimba, they're named themselves, right? They named themselves since there is no L sound in their spoken language. So no, right? Right? That's very important. That's very, very, very important. So when you see on those results, right, Rimba and Lemba, they're the same, right? But Vinda, these are one peoples, which majority of them are actually the real Israelites. And they have a story that they got there in the 1200s, right? It's very important. It's very, very, very important. So they were moving and they got there. And that's who was with the Lemba, is the Vinda, right? And that's what we was looking at, right? Very, very important. And that's why I went to this, right, to talk about how the Vinda got there earlier, right? Talking about their migration and everything into the continent of Africa, right? Their origin and migration down in the dark continent of Africa and everything. And it just talks about these groups. So remember this VHA sound, they usually put that on there, but you know, this is the Vinda and this is another group. And they say they were there in the 12th and 1300s. And then notice what it says right here when it talks about the Vinda, right? It talks about these areas of the ones, right? Watch what it says here. It says, it is historically not correct to assume that I don't 100% say that, and the Lemba, right? The Lemba were among the first group to migrate in this area. So it's false to say that the Lemba came there first. It's important. The Vinda during the 12th and 13th century, right? That's very important. They were actually there first. It's important to know that the Vinda was there first. They even talk about that the Vinda was there first, then the Lemba dwelt with these. The last group, obviously talk about these groups, and the Lemba only made their appearance during the 17th century. That's important. And that's what we connected with the history, is that Sinna was replaced with a new population that was there in 300 years, right? And the history matches the same thing. That's when the Ottoman Turks got there, about the 19th, because that same result, this same test result, when it says it was for 300 years, right? The present day residents of Sinna suggest that their ancestry may have moved to the area relevantly recent, 300 years. The Ottomans took over there just recently. That's very important. So for 300 years, the Ottomans had occupation there. Many of them lived there, right? That's very important. And that's what it was expressing. It was expressing that really the Lemba are the late ones to come there later on. That's very important. That's very, very important. So you think Rimba, Lemba are the same, right? And then if you think of that location, very important wars that happened there. That's why I put this information here. It's just going to be talking about those wars that had happened there. So it's an hour long, as you can see here.
Were attempted in the Indian,
but they talk about these wars
Ocean
with the Ottomans and everything and whatnot. So it just talks about those things. So, and I already showed you when I talked about pretty much where they got these individuals and everything, right? From those locations, right? They got those from the location that is basically in Africa, right? With the Lemba and Lemba is the same as Rimba, right? But Vinda is different, right? So that's just some information that they themselves were over here. And remember, this area was owned by the Ottomans. These ones went down. So there's multiple ways they could have went down. They could have just been pushed, but they also was sold. The wars talks about how some of them was being sold during the war. That's very important, that this area was an area of conflict and the genetics matched the story. That's very important. And if anyone tries to say, like, you know, Sinna, there's some sayings with Sinna, and they try to say Sinna is different than Sana right there. They're the same. When I say the same, in the story of the Lemba, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about from this area. And no one can say it's exactly here or exactly here, because they don't even know. Even the historian admits himself and says himself. He says in the oral history, which is rather ominous or mysterious, right? Story, ominous story. They don't know where Sinna is. That's very important. There's many conclusions on where Sinna is, but they know that it must have been somewhere over here. And it has connections to Sinna, right? With the invasions. And it wouldn't matter because the whole area was taken by the Ottomans. The whole area was taken by the Ottoman Turks. But there is a historical quote, a historical documents that tell you Sana'a was taken by the Ottomans. That's very important. And that's what we was talking about when we was going over these little information on these things, these little areas. This little area is a covering area that the Ottomans drew. They drew that is all these areas, they were all gathered to them. This was their area, right? So just to show you that when you think the Lemba, right, always remember when you see that little J in them and everything, there's a story behind how that J got down there. And it might not be that J was originally Israelites, especially when we know that J monophylactically is one with IJK, and that is a Japhetic lineage, even confirmed by geneticists that's Japhetic with actual sources. So that's very important. The other thing we was talking about was that it's important to look at things carefully. Don't let a geneticist tell you, well, Jews are from the Middle East, but look at what actually they're saying. What are real geneticists saying? What are the real reports? Let's see the reports of the geneticists, what the geneticists say. Obviously, be careful with certain papers, like the one that certain papers with not all the information of J. So that's why J group is a very important group, because not all the information of J is known. But it is known when it's found. So that's why it's important. So the Ashkenazim are very highly related to Greeks and Turks. So mostly what we just did was examine that video and examine how the female lineage is Indo-European and the male lineage is Indo-European. So long story short, I'm gonna end it with this. I did a video that is very important, and I'm gonna somehow try to add this on there because sometimes I put sources in the description. I'll end it like this. Let me just go to this video here and show what I have here, because I gotta maybe make a video and just concentrate on this one thing. This little video right here is I feel it's one of my most important videos. There's a piece that I was looking for, was this little piece of information, and I must have closed it and then show it. But let me show you the oldest E ever found in upper areas. Now there's older E's, but this one is interesting because it's a fossil. That's what makes this interesting, because a lot of people, they want to see the fossils. I'm like that too. I want to see the fossil. I want to see the actual fossil of what was found. So let me show you this E, right? The reason why I'm showing you this is because when you think of the Iberians, they were first found, right? The Iberian or the Iberians, right? They were first found in Europe. They were first found in Europe. The E group at its oldest stage was found in Europe. Let me just make sure this is the right one. I think I keep opening the wrong one. All right. So I'm gonna put this in the description. So on this part, on S3, it just has information on the ancient Indo-Europeans. This will have, Indo-Europeans. It talks about the location, Hungary and whatnot, Indo-European locations, right? Go over here. You can see you have your I, G, and F's groups there and whatnot, right? F's, these are ancient Indo-European lineages, right? F makes G and I. F is the father lineage of all those, right? It's very important. It also has, if I recall, this has the female lineages too. Yeah, right there. So it got the female lineages connection, right? Let us know which ones are the Indo-European female lineages. But now let me show you a interesting find on here. This location that I'm going to show you here, right? It has an ancient E. So it's going to be this one right over here. Notice that time frame, 15, 16,000 years ago. And remember what I showed you, this location, right? I showed this location already, but just to show again where it's found. I don't know why I closed my map, but it's in Europe pretty much. It's this location. I'll just put it right here. It's at this location, right? Well, it's at, let's go to a map. Let's go to a map here. All right, let's zoom out just so you can see which location. So this location, this is the oldest E I have ever, well, besides the one that I found in that video, But this is the oldest E, the one that I found in Europe. This is the oldest E I found in Europe. The oldest E I found in Europe. 16,000 years ago. About 15,000 years ago. And this is very important because what they found with that E is the female lineage, the mtDNA is V3A. But notice that it's going to be an ancient E group, right? It's going to be an ancient E group. That's very important. So you see what you're seeing there? That's a real lineage. It's a real find in Europe 16,000 years ago with a E group, an E male group, right? E male. Probably E1 lineage, most likely E1, right? I'll do a live and I'll do it just directly only about this find right here. That's very important. So why do they call E African when we got an E with a V3A, right? Because remember, V comes from U, right? V comes out from U and everything. Or is that what's that from H? Might have been from H. I might get that twisted. But it's from N. It's an Indo-European female lineage, right? That V3A is an Indo-European female lineage. None of these have it. None of these have that exact one. But that V3A is with that E1B or with an E lineage. That makes all your E lineages. So E is a Eurasian lineage. That's important. So very powerful stuff on that one. Very, very powerful stuff. I'll put that in the description and whatnot. So with that, family, as always, bringing these things out, Synthetic Sunday today. That was what we did today. So that was just something for this little video. So with that, family, yep, that's right. That's right. So with that, family, be blessed, be beloved. And I'm just going to see if anyone has any questions. If I missed anything, just that person keep putting their ads there. But that's all I got for you, family. In summary, the E group are the Eurasians. D and E are the Eurasians. The L3 are the women. That's a very important fact. I already talked about that when we talked about E1A and E2, is that we found L3 in the Levant multiple times in the years. And in summary, to end this with a summary, be careful when examining these things and know without a doubt that every group that you see over here under HIJK, they're one and they're Japhetic. These are going to be the Shemites. So with that, be blessed, be beloved, and amen, family.